Okay, great. We're live on YouTube. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for being here with us. Welcome to tonight's steering committee meeting, which is functioning as the fifth meeting of our zoning subcommittee. So as a reminder, the ultimate goal for this subcommittee is to help limit the total rounds of revisions that will be required for the draft zoning code updates before they are referred to the town board and for public hearing. And this will help us ultimately stay on budget with this comprehensive plan project. So in summary, tonight, we are going to be reviewing one final batch of recommended updates to the zoning code. And as always, these updates need to be aligned with the draft comprehensive plan vision statement, goals and objectives. We're also going to be reviewing minor updates to previous batches that have already been publicly posted based on the additional work that NPV has done between December and now. And at the end of the meeting, we will make sure to review next steps. So leading up to tonight's meeting, the full town board, Judd, who's our planning board counsel, and Jan, who's the town planner, and the full zoning subcommittee group here reviewed these recommendations from NPV, from Valerie and her team. And I want to thank everybody here for your ongoing time and effort. This has been no small feat. So thank you, thank you, thank you a million times over. So we all understand tonight we're reviewing with an eye towards two things, as always. One, consistency with the draft vision statement, goals, and objectives. And two, practical implementation and efficiency. With regards to practical implementation, this subcommittee includes the various delegated boards and councils that implement this code on an ongoing basis. So we expect the members here will be able to make suggestions and ask questions that help NPV further refine the recommendations. So turning our attention to tonight's agenda, once again, I just want to highlight all the changes that NPV has proposed to the Lewisboro zoning code are based on and grounded in the public input that they have received directly from the public. They've collected it during round 1, round 2, and now recently round 3 of public workshops and surveys. Each of the changes is directly related to one of the draft goals and objectives for the comprehensive plan. We know that some of the proposed changes from NPV, particularly in this batch that we're reviewing tonight, will require a policy decision. And we all know and appreciate that the town board is the ultimate authority here. So it's great that we have comments from the town board, that Andrea and Dan, as well as Jan and Judd, are working on this with us. I know Judd is expected to be here tonight, but Jan will not be able to be here due to a family emergency. As a result of everybody being here together, we have a great framework to have a productive discussion and work towards our goal of streamlining this process, limiting the total rounds of revisions, and importantly, staying on budget. So as usual, I know we have a lot to get through tonight. We will keep going until we're done, whatever time that might be. I'm going to be watching the clock closely and making sure that we keep the discussion moving along. So if I stop you in the middle of a comment, ask you to hold a comment, and please know it's nothing personal. And please make note of any questions that go unanswered tonight and follow up with me and or Kirsten after the meeting to let us know. So thank you so much again. Before we dive in, quick point of order. I just want to make sure we approve I'm going to motion to approve the minutes from the November 20th zoning subcommittee meeting that were circulated ahead of time. Can I get a second for that?
Second.
Excellent. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, you got enough? Great. Okay. So with that, let's dive right into the agenda. I'm going to share my screen as usual, and we'll go through all the documents together. Oh, good. And Judd is just joining us right now. Perfect timing. We are going to let him in and then immediately ask him to start chatting with us about the wireless code revisions that he's proposing. Let's just let him come in. Hi, Judd. Are you there? There you are.
Yeah,
Hi.
and now I'm unmuted. Okay.
Okay. Are you ready to dive right in and walk us through? We have you first on the agenda to walk us through your part one and part two of the
Yes.
code revisions.
All right.
And
And look, I apologize for the manner in which it's presented, but rather than try to get into the code and kind of work it out, I just figured this would be a hopefully easier way, at least for me to, I look like I'm in the witness protection program. I'm sorry. The lighting's not great. To present and kind of walk through it. So the objective, the objective that I'm, trying to secure by way of these revisions is to bring the town code really into conformity with kind of best practices and also requirements that are now, attached to local, zoning decision making relating to wireless facilities under federal law. And so part of that is one to really go back through the existing code and kind of call out existing definitions, existing structures, and then once that's done, to work right into basically a new process for permitting these types of facilities. And I'll get to the two types in a moment. So the town had created an antenna advisory board that has been in existence for a while. Under the new code provision, there really is no need. There's no there's nothing provided by way of the antenna advisory board, certainly for purposes of permitting. I suppose if the town wants to maintain an antenna advisory board for kind of more what I'll call sort of overarching policy review and planning purposes, that can occur. But I just, from both kind of a legal perspective and also from just kind of the experience of the planning board, certainly since the time I've been there, this board's been somewhat dormant. So that is, my recommendation is to eliminate that board. The second part of this is to then strike, a number of existing definitions in the zoning code in chapter 220 that relate to wireless facilities. And if you'll scroll down, you'll see that these are really just being updated by virtue of a new set of definitions. And there are definitions that are to be included in the overall, wireless zoning code definition portion of the code. And then in the wireless provision itself, there are some additional definitions that are included specifically for purposes of that section. And I just realized something. I lifted some of the definitions from a code we did for the town of Bedford, and I see there's a correction there. I have Bedford instead of Lewisboro in one of the definitions.
Okay.
All correct.
Okay. Yeah, we can fix that.
Yeah.
Should I go to the second part now?
Yeah.
Great.
So this is 220.41.1 is the current provision of the code that relates to wireless permitting. It has always been within the purview of the planning board by way of a special use permit with an accompanied site plan as part of the special permit process. The one amendment that was made several years ago with a change in federal law had to do with applications to modify existing facilities. There basically is a federal carve out for modification of existing, towers and overall wireless facilities, that if a proposed modification does not create a kind of falls within the parameters of kind of specified limits in terms of the degree of change that they'll create to the existing facility, they're really to bypass sort of board review and just basically go directly to the building inspector. And that there was a change that was kind of grafted into the existing code several years ago. You'll see that it's an eligible facilities request that's picked up here. So the first portion, that purpose and intent, in many respects follows or continues to follow the current purpose and intent provisions of this section. And you can go down. These are definitions that are specific to these types of facilities. If you want to just scroll up, I've included definitions for the one definition I just want to point out, and we'll get there in a minute, is the shot clock provision. This is a product of federal law. And as we go down through the code, you'll see that there are specific timeframes that will be imposed with regard to the review and disposition of applications for these types of facilities. There's an exemption provision. I think some of this really speaks for itself, but we just want to clean up one that when we are talking about wireless telecommunications facilities, any type of wireless facility that's specific to a building, and not intended for sort of broadcast or telecommunication use, those are exempted. And then you'll see there is the exemption for an eligible facilities request, and that is a defined term above in terms of what's exempt, and it provides that if there is a eligible facilities request that's made, it's subject only to a building permit review and approval. The next provision just sets forth the general provisions relating to permits that are required, basically setting forth that any wireless telecommunication facility that is not exempt will be subject to a permitting process. And as you go down, you'll see that we break that process into two. I'll jump ahead. Just hold it there. As we'll get to it in a moment, but you'll see that we break that process into two types of facilities. A small facility, which is defined actually by size, and with regard to those facilities, what we're thinking about is, if we get to the point where we are looking at, small cell type installations that could be mounted on utility poles, or something less than a monopole or a tower, we want to have a permitting process for that, but one that is not perhaps as extensive as a special permit review. And then large facilities, which are the traditional towers, monopoles, et cetera, those will be subject to site plan approval with an accompanying site plan approval before special permit approval with an accompanying site plan review, as currently is done by the planning board. We have included a location priority provision, which basically carves out or specifies in sort of descending order where these types of facilities should be situated in terms of what a potential applicant or provider should look to first. This is new for purposes of our code. We have used this in other jurisdictions. You can use it or not use it, but it is there. At least it creates or places an onus on an applicant coming in to at least examine at a minimum other less intrusive locations for a facility.
And we don't have to go through every section necessarily.
Yeah.
But
So
whatever.
just why don't you go on down? This is just the application. This is the nuts and bolts of an application, a little more expansive than what we have now. Now we're getting to the two, if you can go back up. All right. G is the approval procedure for a small wireless facility permit. Again, these are for smaller, smaller facilities, and the types of installations that I'm sort of contemplating again would be, particularly as the technology progresses, although it's available now, are the smaller, like utility pole mounted cell facilities. We have, because of the size of these facilities, we've pared this process down. We give the planning board the option to conduct a public hearing if it wants to. The waiver provision is in G1. And then if you go down this time frame for approval, this is what I want to point out. And this time frame is going to govern both the small and the you can go back up, the small and the large wireless permit process. So,
John, do you have a question that's specific to this?
Yeah, so the way these pole mounted things work is you do a bunch of them, right? With the new technologies like C-band, where you need a lot more cell towers, but they have a shorter range. Do you prove them as a group, or do you have to do each and every one of them?
John, that's a good question. Under this provision, you would get a permit for each one. We can look at maybe tailoring that provision a little bit in the event we have, a series of these being proposed.
Yeah, I mean, I think that if we don't do that, we're going to be kind of left out of some of these new technologies, because that's kind of the direction they're heading.
Mm-hmm.
They're going to be probably maybe lower power, but the way it works is the faster they are, the shorter the range. So
right.
Okay,
so
well, let's make a note of that.
Just pin that. Yeah.
Yeah, Charlene, applicable to this particular section. You're on mute.
I agree with John. And are any in existence now?
In the town?
Yeah.
No, none that I'm aware of.
Okay. Thank you.
Great. You can keep moving. I'm just making a note of that.
So this, if you want to just go, so if you could just go back up just for these three periods. So this is, as I said, this is the product of federal law in terms of placing time limits on a determination. You'll see that within 60 days of receipt of a complete, and I'll underscore complete, application, the planning board has to decide whether to approve or disapprove, et cetera. And within 90 calendar days of a complete application for a small facility on a new utility pole, monopole, or other support structure, final decision whether to approve, not approve, those are lifted from federal law. The key thing is complete application. And obviously the board has to make a determination that an application is complete to trigger that time clock. However, under subsection D, we need to review these applications when they come in and request and try to begin to obtain supplemental information within 10 days receipt. You have 10 days to notify, and then once the supplemental submission is in, the time clock resumes. So you're going to see these are really, I mean, these are lifted, again, more from the federal standards. And we're utilizing these timeframes in other jurisdictions.
So Judd, how does that work in the 10 days? We don't have a board meeting every 10 days. So can that be?
That's going to have to be on or Kirsten or the building department. And
Okay.
I think the way to deal with that is to have almost a standard checklist, and review and just get that request out, as quickly as possible.
Okay, as long as it doesn't have to be a board meeting,
No, yeah,
that's good.
it's not, yeah.
Okay, perfect. We can have somebody else do that.
That can be, that's a ministerial function.
Okay, great.
This section just relates to, additional regulations when the small facilities are in the public right of way. Again, I was just looking at other codes in other jurisdictions in terms of the kind of the dimensional requirements. I don't know if Valerie or certainly I'd like Jan to take a look at this. Maybe run this by the highway department as well. But the idea is that if you are in the public right of way, this is something that's deserving of a little more tighter design control.
Okay, great.
And this last section is the special use permit for large facilities, and quite frankly, I think this continues to follow the process the planning board adheres to now with regard to towers and the like. We haven't had a new tower in a while.
Okay.
And there is, you can keep going. It has general and specific requirements: height, setback, visibility, security, requirements, the same kind of approval process with the time clock, application escrow. And I see Dan, small wireless, I believe, is defined either in the definitions before or in the code. If it's not, it's an oversight. I'll correct that.
Jan, go ahead.
Yeah, so I didn't see that we, so question, whether we could put in here that the planning board may require a power backup. And I don't know whether that is something that would be allowed by, state or federal law.
What the requirement for?
So that, if power goes out right now, some people have backup generators, some vendors, like I think Verizon sometimes does, but
Right.
AT&T I don't think does. And so it means that there are some people who are without.
Can you go back, because I thought I picked that up.
I saw something that said, oh, it's in part 1. Okay.
Yeah.
Oh no, sorry, that was for Dan's question.
Yeah.
What are we looking for? Power backup?
Yeah, the generator power backup.
I thought I saw something that said the planning board can ask for things that it thinks would be required for effective use or something. And I didn't know whether that was good enough. Maybe you do have it in there. I'm sorry. Might have missed it.
Oh,
I'll go back, but I think
You have to go up a little bit.
Yeah.
That's right here.
Yeah, may require.
Okay, may require. Great. Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm sorry I missed.
Okay.
Yeah, you keep going down. Recertification. It's everything's put on a 5-year anniversary date with a recertification requirement. It also relates to existing permits. We want to try, and I probably want to finesse this language perhaps a little more, but what we were trying to do and talk to Jan about this was to try to get a lot of these special permits kind of on a standard kind of calendar. So I'll look at that.
Okay.
There's a default provision and a revocation provision. And then we don't have this now. I don't believe is a removal provision. That in the event a facility is discontinued, abandoned, etc., it provides places an obligation on the owner operator to dismantle and decommission the facility with rights to the town to step in the event it needs to. And that's it. The one thing I didn't pick up, and I'd have to scroll back, there is a carve out for these types of facilities on town-owned property, which in the event of town-owned property, it is not the planning board, it's the town board.
Great. And I think let's pause there. Just any follow-up questions for Judd about part 1 or part 2? Okay, Jan?
Yeah, so the other thing I'd say is, while I see here the AAB isn't part of the code, I still think there's a role for the AAB, and I guess I just want to clarify that because I think they can help us understand upcoming, future technology, where it might be going. And I think it's also a valuable way for the public to give input. So I think I sort of want to separate taking it out of the code from saying that the board doesn't have a role. That's all.
Can you clarify that, Judd? So if
I suggested striking it because one, the board does not play a role in the approval processes. I'm not wed to the idea of eliminating it altogether. Like I said, if you want to maintain it as just an advisory board, I mean, if you want to maintain it as something like akin to the CAC, just to have another board that is focused on these issues, that's fine. It's
can you clarify if that part does get struck from the code, can the board still exist, or what would need to be, you see what I'm saying? What's the disconnect there? Can the board still exist even
the board could, but if the town board is gonna create this board, I would say keep it in, and let me just take a look at the language, add it again, and perhaps just modify it a little bit.
Okay.
Yeah.
So Dan,
I'll look at that. I'll look at that.
Okay, Dan.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I think at one point we discussed at the town board about merging cable TV and antenna review into one communications advisory board, and then they could, they would stay up on the technologies because things are changing, and kind of that way it wouldn't have to stand on its own and be waiting for a year and a half for something to actually transpire.
Okay, thanks, Dan. Andrea?
Actually, the board actually just recently met. So they are active. They have met. They had a meeting the other night. So I'm anticipating that we're going to want to keep it either as an independent board or in combination with the Cablevision Advisory Committee. I think they, you know, for lack of a better term, they may have been dormant, Judd, because there wasn't much to do, because we're kind of, this whole idea of cell towers and the cell service, and it's been like this.
Right, right.
So, you know, it kind of went quiet for a really long time, and now it's revving up again.
Okay.
So,
They keep, yeah, then no problem keeping it.
Yeah.
Or combining, you know, combining functions with another board. That's fine.
Okay, thank you. Charlene?
Yes, this is just a question between the shot clock and the new regulations, the federal regulations, how much input really can the advisory committee have, and would it impair the timing?
Well, I think the advisory, if there's an advisory board and an application is submitted, I think you would need to get it to the advisory board. And I would say, sort of as with the CAC now, you know, they should review and turn around as you know, as promptly as they can any comments on a pending application. It won't affect, you know, that the existence of that board or their comments will not affect the timelines. And I don't want, you know, again, while the timelines are there and they're definite timelines and they have to be observed, this issue of what is complete for purposes of triggering it is, you know, it gives the town the ability to really suspend or toll, you know, the clock from running until it is provided with, you know, the information it feels is necessary for an application to be thoroughly vetted and complete.
Does that include a recommendation by the advisory committee?
It could, although I would urge the advisory board to provide comments promptly, because I view an application being complete as something that is really more driven by what you're getting from the applicant than from other, from,
Yeah.
other town boards. Yeah.
Thank you.
Don? You're on mute.
I think the value of the advisory board is, look, there, I used to do this for IBM, but there's a lot of new technologies coming. I mean, there's things like C-band. The cell companies are trying to get into the internet business. All of that thing is emerging now, and I think you need somebody connected to the town board to advise them of what's happening. You know, what are the potentials for the town? Everybody, what we got in the comprehensive plan is everybody would like better internet service.
Mhm.
The only way we're going to get that, or better cell service too, is to be aware of these new technologies and trends, and then make a determination whether they fit in our town or not. Right now C-band doesn't fit in our town, so but I think the value of having a board like that is at least some group keep staying aware of that.
Okay, great. So any other questions or comments on this section? Okay, let's move on from that. It sounds like what's going to happen is Judd's going to go away and take comments from tonight and clean things up a little bit. And Judd, when you do that, if you can track changes so that everybody can see what you've changed since this version, that would be awesome.
Right. And if I can, well, I'll have an offline discussion perhaps with Valerie, just as a way to look, there's a running joke in my office that anytime I do track changes.
Right. Yeah. Why don't you talk to me? Talk to me about that. And
So I'll have somebody
I'll help you.
That's why. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Google Drive makes it really nice and simple.
Sure.
Okay. Great. Thank you, Judd. Really appreciate it. And sorry to put you on the spot so early, but we wanted to make sure we went through that carefully. Okay. So the next topic, we're going to kick over to Valerie. We're going to move to the the proposed changes to sewers and sewage disposal chapter. So I'll let Valerie give an overview because I know she's been active in the document this week and looking at the comments folks were making and answering comments. So I'll let her start with just where things stand right now and what she's thinking.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. All right, so one of the things I just wanted to kind of, before we get into all the details and going back and forth, there was a lot of comments. So your sewers and sewage disposal chapter already basically has almost like the inspection and the like pump outs, like basically as one in the same in terms of the definition. And when this was initially looked at by the zoning committee, and I think a couple people commented at that point, they noted that the definition of inspection sort of includes like basically a pump out, and they noted that that really should be separated in terms of like definitions and terminology and stuff like that. So that's what we did, right? And what we did was we looked at the recommended timeframes in terms of inspections, in terms of pump outs. Now it's clear based on the comments that I heard that everyone's like, well, why are we separating them? We should just have them required to do inspections and pump outs at the same time, which is absolutely fine. And if that's the direction we want to go in, instead of like nitpicking through the different definitions, I think it really just comes down to then what we would go in is we would maybe clarify that one definition instead of calling it an inspection, call it basically an inspection and pump out, right? And then still require it every 3 years. And the biggest thing that we would require and that I would suggest keeping in there is that if the inspections fail, that's when, you need some more language as to what the remedies are, right? That people need to start working on them if the inspections or the pump outs, there's problems associated with it. So when we go through those comments, just kind of keep that in mind when we're looking at people raising questions of like, why are we separating the two? We should bring them together, and we can absolutely bring them together. That's not an issue. That's kind of how the code was originally structured. And I really think the more important pieces are dealing with, well, when things do fail, how do we deal with in terms of developing the next steps and also enforcement.
Okay, I think, can everybody agree on that as a group, that based on the comments and the discussion happening behind the scenes, that these two line items, that it would be inspection and pump out combined together instead of separating them out? Does anybody object to that?
Can I just?
Yeah, and Andrea has her hand up too.
Oh, sorry, Andrea, go first.
So I hate to put him on the spot, but we do have an expert in this field on this committee. The chairman of our zoning board, who's with us. I would like to, maybe he has an opinion. Hello, Duff. Maybe he has an opinion on the value of separating them out versus together. This isn't my area of expertise, but I personally like them separated out, but.
Okay, Dan, why don't you ask your question first? And
Yeah,
then...
I just want to say there's background here, and Jan is extremely familiar because both of us sat in the what was then the county septic committee or subcommittee, whatever it was at the time, as this was all being worked out, and there was a great kind of concern about the need to develop an inspection process, but not wanting to make it something that was going to be really difficult for people to do, or who are they going to contract to do that? So that's where this thing came together as one process, and they figured you're going to have to do these pump outs. The haulers can come and at least do a basic, check that the baffles are not dislodged or broken or whatever, and look for obvious seepage. That's their obligation anyway. And then a form was developed for them to be able to just check this off. Those forms go to the county and they get entered into the database, and that's the data that we're supposed to be working from. So I would, take care in sort of deviating from that process, because if you have separate inspections going on, will they be recorded and all the rest of that?
Well, they're supposed to be, they're going to be now required to actually be recorded, not only at the county, but within the town of Lewisboro. Like, you're going to start keeping records of who is doing their inspections and pump outs.
Right. And what I'm saying is that process originally was essentially decided that it would go to the haulers to be responsible for, because they're going to be out there pumping anyway. So as to not make an additional burden on the homeowners, make this process difficult. If you have some independent entities coming to inspect, are they going to get that same form and do the same? There's no process for that right now that I'm aware of.
Okay, Jeff, you have thoughts you want to share?
Yes. Well, basically, you would want your system, your tank pumped every 2 years, and when the licensed pumper does that, you're supposed to examine the system, inspect it to see if there's any leakage or any malfunctions, and he reports that to the county when he sends his slip in that he pumped a tank. As far as the town being involved to make sure it's done, that's a whole different level of requirement, and someone has to be in charge of that. I mean, to make sure that it's done, to enforce it. So that's where the problem lies with that kind of thing. But I mean, it's a good thing for everybody to be doing all this stuff naturally. There are some instances, like on some of the lakes, where you have these undersized systems, they periodically leak and do not perform as they should. And that is a problem that's ongoing. I don't know how you're going to deal with that. But generally, the county is the overriding authority on all these septic systems.
So are you saying that inspection and pump out, typically they occur at the same time and they can be lumped together as one?
Yes.
Okay. Andrea, does that answer your question? You have your hand raised. Go ahead.
Yes, it does, because like we were saying, we don't want to make the process more onerous than it has to be. And if it's already done by the company that comes to do it already, then, then it makes sense to combine it in our local zoning law as well. My concern is adding the extra layer of protection with the town. So who's going to bear that burden? It sounds like the building department is going to bear that burden, and they're already stretched thin. So, enforcement of that, again, you want to say, oh, well, the filing of it, the burden is borne upon the company that comes to do the pumping, but perhaps on the town level, they hand a copy to the homeowner, and the homeowner is responsible for filing it with the town, as opposed to the company. Something to be considered on that level. I think it's very difficult to expect the company to also file with the town as well as the county. I think that's asking an awful lot of the contractor to do. I think we should consider having the homeowner do it. But then the second part of that is, I don't know how exactly we're anticipating this enforcement within the town is going to occur. It's a big job. We have a building department that's already stretched thin, and there's got to be something about that in here, and we can't just say, well, it'll be enforced by the town.
Right.
There's got to be a how.
I think the bottom line is it's being identified by the building department to be enforced by the town. if the town doesn't want to enforce it. I mean, basically, technically, you have it on the books right now that the town could enforce it if they want to, right? But it's clear that it hasn't really been effective. And some of it is because there's not really the violations and some of the requirements that if something does fail inspection, that they need to start moving, that a homeowner needs to start moving forward to rectifying the situation. So ultimately, it would be the building department. If for some reason you feel that the town doesn't have that wherewithal to do that, I mean, then I guess you could keep what you have on the books and not make any overall amendments to this. But I know this was something that of concern from the public throughout the comprehensive plan process.
It's absolutely a concern of the public, especially those in the lake communities, you
Right.
know, because the failing septics is a huge contributor to the problem that we're having in the lakes. You know, I think, you know, unless we can come up with a way that enforcement is efficient and makes sense on the town level, you know, we may want to just leave it as it is. A lot of these things, sadly, only pop up and only come into play when someone sells their property, right? Because, you know, when there's an inspection done by a potential new homeowner, they're going to want to test the septic or anyway, and that's when these problems come up. So I'm a little concerned. I understand the need the desire to want to regulate it more strictly because of the issues that are coming up within the town. I just think practically speaking, it's impossible on the town level to do. So I'm open to hearing ideas on how that could be done within the building department or otherwise that can be incorporated here, but I'm not optimistic that we can come up with a plan that works.
Okay, well, let's look at what Valerie's actually proposed. I want to answer the other questions, but Valerie, just pausing to let you say anything else about what's actually written in the proposed language that would address anything. Or maybe
Right,
I'll give you, should I give you a second at other questions and then come back to you?
No, I mean, I think really for the most part, we didn't specifically, I mean, clearly we identified the building department, right? Because they're the ones that are going to be potentially issuing the violations. The only change that we're really suggesting is if you look at 183, 183-3-C, which is really just if the inspection fails, the owner shall seek immediate remedy of the situation and contact the Westchester County Department of Health and town building inspector regarding the failure. I think, you know, if for some reason, I mean, this at least requires them to have to move on this, right? Because if nobody else is, and at least then the town could say, you're violating this section, right? You know that you failed the inspection, you're not moving forward with this, we're going to issue a violation. You know, so I mean, really part of this is just trying to put a little bit more teeth into this and, you know, but for the most part, we're not proposing a lot of different structure in terms of what you already have. It's just, you know, you already have that you require, I think you already have in the thing every 3 years, I believe, you require, once every 5 years, you're requiring the pump out. And you have on here, upon completion of inspection, the owner shall maintain a copy of record, you know, sanitary code, which may be provided by the owner to the seepage collector for a minimum of 6 years, that they have to have that on. And what we're just saying is that additional copies need to be sent to the building department. So, I mean, that's really, if you don't want to require the building department to collect the additional copies, I think that's one of the things that we've heard. There's just a disconnect in the information so the town never really knows who's up, you know, actually pumping and doing the inspections versus, you know, so that's something that we just thought maybe would be helpful in terms of record keeping. But again, that's really up to the town how you want to handle this. You know, but we were suggesting having additional record keeping within the town, and then also that there's an immediate remedy that's required if things are failing.
Okay, that's helpful. So let's go to the questions. I told Jan in the chat a while ago she could go, so I'm going to say Jan first.
Okay, thank you. A couple of things here. One is that we just got a new stormwater permit that the town has to abide by. And it does combine pump out and inspection in the definition. So I put that in the chat, but that is so I agree with putting it together. Also, I strongly agree with the suggestion that Valerie had about if there is a failure on inspection that you have to fix it. And by the way, that is also a requirement of the new permit. So it all, that fits very closely. I think I did hear loud and clear that people were wanting us to do some enforcement. And we have been waiting on the county. I think one of the things that the town board authorized this year, which was to allow a re-update of the assessment database so that I know this is a little technical, but the block lot sheet will now match Westchester County's print key, and we should be able to track better if we want to, but that's a help. The other thing is I think we should talk to the building inspector. I know one of the things he has suggested is that at a minimum, if somebody puts in a building application of any sort, a permit and, for anything from, something relatively small, like a generator, to a whole big addition, that that somebody shows him that it's been pumped within the last 5 years in order for the application to go forward. Now, that's maybe some subsection of what gets done, but that's one way to start to, that's not so much enforcement as much as a reminder to get people to have stuff done. But I think we ought to talk to the building inspector and see if this is something that he thinks could be done. I know we rely on the county, but the county isn't doing it. And from what I hear, people in the town, the people that do pump, sort of feel like everybody else should pump too, and are frustrated when that doesn't happen. So, it's obviously a town board decision, but there might be ways that we can make it happen. And it is, by the way, it is a requirement in the stormwater permit. I don't know how much they are going to start looking at auditing the permit, or how much this might motivate any other people in the county or the town to get it done.
Okay, so we're gonna go to John next, and then Charlene, and then Andrea just raised her hand too.
So my understanding is the data is available at the county level. I'm not sure how completely accurate or full it is, but it's not a simple process to collect that data and review it. For the town to take this over, I think I agree with Andrea. You've got to create a database and a process and a person. And you also can't, I don't believe, rely on the pumpers to necessarily update. I mean, you could have somebody from out of this area do your pumping, and that wouldn't necessarily get updated. So unless you can put the onus on the homeowner, it's going to be a difficult process. I mean, Jan knows that we've had people come into the planning board with things, and we've asked them about their septic system. They don't even know where it is. So this is not going to be a simple process to do it accurately, but it's important. So it's going to take some, I think, investment on the town and maybe some kind of professional service to get this done correctly.
Okay, let's go to Charlene next. You're on, yeah, unmute.
Unfortunately, the county is not going to solve our problems. I mean, they are somewhat overwhelmed. I mean, we may be overwhelmed, but they're really overwhelmed with it, with this. And if we want to have any result with improving our septic systems, then we have to do it ourselves. If that's the case, then I relying on the homeowners is really putting another burden on them. Relying on the contractors, I think is easier. I mean, we have contractors, like even for fences, there's many places where fences are, no permit is required for a fence under 6 feet, but we don't require it for posts. So I'm not really sure why it would be so much a burden on the contractor, because they're used to relying on the town code or the municipal code. I think that the suggestion that we talk to the building inspector and see how he would most be comfortable with is a good suggestion. However, not doing anything or doing a very minimal amount is just saying, hey, that's the way life is and we can't improve it. And so I would say that we should do something, and that something should be that the town takes responsibility for it. That's an opinion.
Andrea?
I don't disagree with the points that everyone is making. I'm just trying in my head to put together, practically speaking, how that would work. You know, it's coming up with the process that's the issue. It's not that it shouldn't be regulated, it should. I think we can all agree on that. It's just the how part, which is going to be a feat. That said, and another issue that I don't know if there's any way to address it here, and I seriously doubt, is that all of you know that within the town we have we're very economically diverse, especially in the lakes. We go from, you know, multi-million-dollar homes on the lakes to small bungalows on, you know, postage stamp type properties with, they don't have full-blown septics, etc. You know, my concern is if someone is found to be in violation of the statute and they're told that they need to remedy it, I think there's going to be a number of instances where you have a homeowner that cannot afford to fix their system in the way that's going to, that would be required by law to update it, especially on those smaller pieces of property. And why I'm thinking Charlene would have the answers to this, I don't know why, and I apologize, Charlene, if I'm putting you on the spot, but someone, and I thought it was Charlene, whether or not there's something out there for private homeowners who can't afford to do this. Janet's shaking her, maybe it was Janet, you know, that we were talking about this because we want people to be able to fix their septic systems, but many cannot. So there's got to be some sort of funding or some sort of help out there. I know that some grants, we were talking about some grants or something recently. Can someone refresh my memory and maybe how, if there's any ideas on how to incorporate it?
The county does have grants for fixing septics, and they are some of them, what they currently have are means tested, and they are looking at coming out with something that will not be means tested, but will be available. If you have a problem, come get funding. So that is a Westchester County offering that is in the works, I understand. But I think
let's can we pause for just a second? I think I want to just ask Valerie for a second. In terms of what the changes that you're proposing and how that would change the process, I think there might be a little disconnect here. Like the big change is the 3 years versus 5. But let's just, for argument's sake, assume that we weren't changing the 5. What else is being proposed that would change in the law that would require the town to spring into action on the process, essentially?
The only thing that would, I mean, it's not so much requiring the town to spring into action. It's really just there's additional information being sent to the town, and that the town has the ability, right? So technically, if it's on the book saying that if inspection fails, that people should act on it. Theoretically, if the town doesn't enforce some, right? And then I'm not trying to target the town. If any town doesn't enforce, other regulations or just, or enforces it when there's really an issue, or at least there's something in your code at that point that allows for the town to start a little bit more enforcement. That being said, if you want, I understand the concerns with the costs. I mean, that's something that other communities have taken into consideration when considering these types of regulations. But in all reality, that's something that gets people moving if they can start getting issues of violation. If the town's able to issue violations based upon, the inaction and allowing for the septic system to remain in disrepair.
So basically, the big changes proposed as of right now are the 3 years versus 5 for pump out and inspection, and if the infection in this 183(3)(c), if an inspection fails.
Right.
But other than that, everything else is basically elaborate.
Yeah, because the other pump out requirements, that's just basically, I mean, if you look at the language, it's basically I'm cutting and paste, like that was basically the inspection language. So that hasn't really changed. And then the only other thing that changed was I upped the violations that could be issued. So
Okay.
that, other than that's it.
I just wanted to make sure we were all clear on that. And did I get everybody who already had their hand raised? Then I go to Dan next. Okay, go ahead, Dan.
Just quickly, I think the greater likelihood is probably that we would learn of the issue through the county data once that data stream is fixed. And Jan noted the main sort of critical path item to getting that fixed is now in place to fix those block, whatever numbering systems so they could be mapped to people, and we would get a data set, and it's not an amazingly difficult exercise to go through those dates and see which ones exceed 5 years and come up with a set of people who are out of compliance and or have it checked off somehow that they've been violated or something. So that's where we have to head, I think.
Okay, Jan?
Yeah, so I am going to volunteer. If the town board decides that the building inspector should take on enforcement, I will volunteer to go and work to make sure that happens. I am willing. I've thought a lot about the process and everything, so I'll gladly do that. But to get back to the code changes, the thing that I would like to ask about, now we do have people with holding tanks, and telling them to pump once every 5 years is not adequate. And I wondered whether you have thought, I don't remember whether in all the going back and forth, whether we thought about including a holding tank with like a minimum once a year. The problem is they're not on the system listed as a holding tank as opposed to a not on the building inspector's system, as far as I know. They are, once they get pumped, they get into the county data, but they're not isolated that way.
Right, so I think that was I did not include that because I felt that now we're getting down to very, very specific, right? And this now, I mean, the town was already concerned about how much they were going to be able to handle with just the septic systems alone, then let alone dealing with holding tanks.
Thank you.
So.
Okay, does anybody else have any questions or comments lingering they haven't voiced yet?
Why don't I do this, Katie? Why don't I clean up this, and get it back to like everything merging. And then maybe we can send it to the building inspector just to get his thoughts on the proposed legislation. And then at that point, at least you have like the town has a structure, and whether they decide to move forward with that as part of like the final public hearings, or whether that's something that they kind of keep on the back burner, at least you have a draft to work with. Does that work?
Yes. And I just want to ask the group to just do a quick thought exercise. So let's piece apart here the proposed changes that Valerie has made and the task of implementing and enforcing them, because the latter, the implementation and enforcement, and whether it happens or not, that's already an issue right now, and something the town's already dealing with. So that aside, for just a moment, if you're just looking at what Valerie has marked up and proposed, does anybody have any specific objections or something they haven't spoke about yet that is jumping out at them? One thing I know we wanted to do, and just confirming with Valerie, it says in the town of Lewisboro and within the watershed in 3 separate places.
Right, we're removing
We're
that.
definitely doing
Yes.
away with that.
Yes.
Because it's
I'm
for
sorry, I
all
missed, what
of-
did you just say? Is it, you're getting rid of in the watershed, or are you keeping it?
Getting rid of
it. So
within-
it's all over the town.
equal across the town, regardless of whether you're in the watershed or not.
Thank you. I agree.
Okay, anybody else? Any other lingering questions or objections? Okay, then I think we're in a good place. It's really just figuring out the nuts and bolts of enforcement and implementation, which is just an ongoing thing the town has to deal with or without an updated code. So it's definitely, we've heard it's a priority, so it's worth looking into, especially while we have the brain trust together to help us get it through. Valerie and again, Jan isn't here tonight, but he has some insight into this as well. And Duff, now that we know you're a contractor too, if you just make sure to look at get your eyes on this from that perspective, and let us know if you have any follow-up questions or comments. Okay, I think we can move on.
Yep.
Okay, so next is battery energy storage. And again, I'll let I know Valerie's been looking closely at the comments and tracking everything in real time, so I'll let you give an overview of where we're at right now.
Right, so I guess for battery energy storage, I think we can go through the comments here. I think the comments are not too difficult. I think everybody read through. It's based on, let me just say this, it's based on the NYSERDA model battery energy storage law, but then I tweaked it for the town of Lewisboro. So there are some things that some people had comments on, and that's like the model law, and we can always tweak it. But in terms of the process and like the specifically which zoning districts and the minimum lot sizes and the setbacks and stuff, that was something that I tailored to Lewisboro. Okay.
So let's go through. I think there were, just lumping some questions together, there were questions about the definitions and how they were sort of ordered. So do you want to?
Right, I mean, I think there was just a couple questions in terms of the definitions of tier 1 and tier 2, they are defined. And then when we started there were some questions that came up about specific batteries or other types of batteries, and whether we have to exclude them. Those are really not battery energy storage systems. So I think we should just probably keep it focused on battery energy storage systems as opposed to every type of lithium battery, or because you'll start running ad nauseum. But I think for the most part, the only comments that I really saw, I mean, I think I addressed most of them. So I don't know if there's really any major issues or concerns in terms of
ones that you hadn't gotten to see were Dan's, just because they came in very late yesterday.
Right. So I think the one question you had, am I not reading correctly, that tier 1 can go up to 600 kilowatts. So the battery energy storage systems, like for tier 1, that's specifically what tier 1 is. And then tier 2 So tier 1 is 40 kilo, it has to be 40 or 80 kilowatts, and then everything else is tier 2.
Is this where the definitions are under E?
So the definitions I actually put into the definitions section. So
Oh.
I updated them. That's why you
That's
probably
why.
don't see them here. Right. They're actually in the definition section.
Okay, that probably clears up something.
Right.
I thought I saw that the tier 1 was basically anything that wasn't, or tier 1 was basically anything that wasn't tier 2 in the definitions. That's why I was
It's tier 2 is anything that's not tier 1. Like there's only 2 tiers for the battery energy storage.
Yeah, but tier 1 didn't have a lower limit, I think, is one of the, it just sort of, it says anything up to, so it could be, unless there was some other wording that took out an awful lot of other things. I didn't, and I know
Right,
it's in a different
there is
section.
no lower limit on purpose, right? Like, because anybody could come in with a battery energy storage system with as low as they wanted to. There's really maximums as to say when it goes to the next tier in terms of regulations and
in the
review.
definition, it says tier 1 battery energy storage systems have aggregate energy capacity of less than or equal to 600 kilowatt hours.
Right.
So that's what I'm saying. Like, as you just said, all the practical examples that are laid out in the actual code
Right.
go up to a maximum of 80 kilowatt hours. I'm just,
Right,
it's
so
not-
those are for the 1 and 2 family residential, and then if you deal with like commercial properties, they could go up to 600 kilowatts.
and still be a tier 1.
Tier 1, that's correct.
Okay. All right.
Now, if you have concerns with that and you want to reduce that number, that's fine too.
Yeah, I mean, let's leave that for the moment. I think on the other end, some of the numbers, because technology is changing so fast, and there are flow batteries that are on the market but not quite yet, and that are non-flammable, and you can have a big tank there and have a lot more kilowatt hours than this, and still have a very reasonable system. So, but we can always come back and tweak, I guess. But
Right,
that just struck me.
Right. No, and I think that's a really good point. One of the things that I would look at in terms of the battery energy storage law, the EV charging stations law, and the solar energy law, I would look at all of them in terms of, is the structure and framework there, right? Does it meet the process you're looking for? Is it in the zoning districts that you feel comfortable with? Because you probably will be tweaking these, right? The technology is changing so quickly. And there could be an update to the model battery energy storage law within the near future, right? And so this way, you could go in and actually make the tweaks that you need to in order to adjust. I think that's really, but the real crux of like a lot of these regulations are, do you feel comfortable with where we're proposing them to be located? Do you feel comfortable with the approval process? And do you feel comfortable that the review process itself is going to be sufficient enough for the town?
That's very helpful. Okay, so with that thinking, let's go back here. Then I didn't see any comments that were, most of the comments were asking specifically about like the nitty-gritty detail.
Right. And Jan suggested, referring it back to the site development plan approval process, and he's correct. I forgot to add that section in. And then the governmental facilities, right? So this is one thing that did come up. And what I was suggesting is, because you, especially in some like educational related facilities and they tend to have larger properties, they could potentially have these structures there while they might be located in one of your residential districts. On those particular sites, they would have potential property to be able to accommodate these types of larger systems. Because right now we're suggesting just the non-residential districts having the opportunity to have some of the larger systems, the tier 2. And then the other thing was this facility area. So instead of defining it, what I was thinking of doing is maybe I just reword it instead of calling it facility area, maybe just say the area of disturbance, right? So the area of disturbance associated with the proposed battery energy storage facility, that 75% of it does not contain one of the following, and then it would list that.
Dan?
Yeah, I guess that would imply that if you said 75% of the area of disturbance, it would say that you could have a wetland inside that. I mean, I think the
You could
idea,
have a wetland within the property. That's correct.
but if you define it as area of disturbance, then that would say that the area of disturbance, the wetland could be within the area of disturbance, which I don't think we want to say. I might not be interpreting that right. I would rather say, if you wanted to say 75% of the parcel or 75%, but I don't think we should say it's okay to have 70% of the area of disturbance be a wetland. That seems to make
75% of the area of disturbance cannot be a wetland.
Yes, but I don't think any of the area of disturbance should be a wetland. I think you could have the parcel have a wetland, but you shouldn't be disturbing a wetland in order to install this, if you see what I'm saying. Maybe in the buffer, maybe something, but
Right, that's fine. So we could change that if you'd like. Because if we do area disturbance, we can change that to cannot have, we can remove it. We can just say, no, it cannot have any sort of wetland or wetland buffer area.
thank you. Yeah, it was confusing to me.
And Jan can consult on that specifically. Did that, Dana, you had a question about facility area too. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, I'd like to see. Oh, was that Dan or me? Yeah, sorry. Go ahead, Dan.
Dan.
Yeah, no, I'm fine. Because I was just answering somebody else who was questioning whether that 75% referred to just the refer to the whole lot or just the area of the project. And I was just saying it has to be the project, the area, the actual.
Right, it is meant to be the project area, but instead of having like another, because I feel like if we try to define that, that's going to get very technical and probably not, I think it really was meant to be more of a generalized thing to try to, basically facilitate where these battery energy storage systems should be sited and to help somebody that's interested in potentially siting them on a particular property to avoid certain environmentally sensitive areas. But what we can do is maybe I'll change it to area of disturbance, and then I'll tweak the specific criteria so that it's clear that you're supposed to avoid these areas.
Okay, great. So I think it would be helpful if we jump as a group to the very last, to the minimum lot size and setback requirements. I mean, obviously, this is a town board policy decision, but just if this group has any questions or feedback about these proposed numbers, I think that would be helpful to collect tonight. And then we can also look at the uses table. I'll have that ready to go too, about where they are permitted.
Well, it says right there, the zoning districts where they're permitted will be, right.
That's okay.
That's for tier 2, tier 1 could be in any zoning district as an accessory use.
Okay, Jan, did you have a question?
Yeah, and this is just, we never see, it's the educational facilities. We never really see the schools come in, and I just am very unclear about whether the schools have to abide by the town code or not? I know this is a little off topic, but
So it's a good question. New York State public schools do not. Private schools would.
okay, so this really in our community has maybe a few, I don't know, there might be some small private schools, but so this really doesn't affect the school district at all. It was just kind of a, do we need to get them involved somehow on this? And if it doesn't apply, then never mind.
Okay, yeah, we can
So-
table that.
Thanks for answering.
Does anybody else have any questions or comments?
Yeah, I had one that was up above. It's not crazy important, but it seemed it might be something that's kind of left out, and that's just in the tier 1 systems. We give the kilowatt hour sort of limits for different scenarios in your garage or exterior walls. And I didn't see anything about interior walls, because some of these, fancy like Tesla units are they're going on any wall in the house, really, in a sense. And it's not clear here which that would fit into.
So are you talking about the electric charging stations, like those types of units, or are you talking about the actual battery energy storage units?
Battery energy
Yeah.
storage.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I can take a look. I think we had, so there would be technically interior in attached or detached garages and detached accessories. But I will take a look for interior spaces and I'll get back to you on that.
Okay. Anyone else?
Just
Okay.
a general comment, and this goes for solar too. And I don't know, it's made be a lot of work, but I just felt like as you're reading along, they're like, oh, here's tier 1 requirements, kind of sneaks up on you, as opposed to sort of like, I feel like it should be like a major heading, like here's stuff that applies to all, or here's what applies to tier 1, here's what applies to tier 2, and here's what applies to all regardless. Would like flow for me right now, and in the solar it actually pops up more, because and some of the here you, at least for some of the the landscaping things, you say for tier 2 systems, landscaping will be this and that and the other thing. In the solar, that little qualifier is not there, so you could read it as applying to any rooftop system or whatever, which of course doesn't make any sense, but I don't know, just there's a readability.
No, absolutely. That's a good point. And I'll make a note of that to check for readability and add some additional headings.
Mm-hmm. I think that's great, because I think we're coming across that in a bunch of these codes where most just, average homeowners that are thinking about doing a project for their individual property, they want to be able to look and see what applies to them up front.
Right.
At the top, and then the stuff that's more complicated that requires site plan and is for bigger scale projects to come after that. So it's clear the difference between those two.
Yep.
And you could actually, you were so inspiring with your matrix solutions for some of the other sections. I think there might be an opportunity for a few more here, even if it's that same section we were just looking at, 40 utility closets, 40 kilowatts, and but
Okay.
those are not mission critical, but opportunities.
Okay. Sounds good.
Okay, so let's move to EV charging stations. How do you want to give an overview of this, Valerie, or do you want to jump right in?
Yeah, no, I do want to talk about this just really briefly. So this is very, very, very new, emerging technologies and emerging regulations. So I will admit that this, the state does not have a model law. We looked at a number, NYSERDA does have design guidelines or best practices that's close to 10 years old at this point. And New Jersey has a couple model laws. So, and we also looked at what other communities have done. And one of the things that a lot of other communities automatically just said, and then they adopted these regulations a while ago, like go ahead and move forward with EV charging stations. But, and, you know, and you can assume that they are, you know, part of any regular parking space, and, you know, and it's really to promote that, right? Which is great. Except that technology has now shifted again as, as normal. And you now have like a lot of third parties coming in, and developing EV charging stations, and they're using them as sort of like, almost like advertisements. And so that's part of the way of them reducing the cost for charging your cars. And then in addition to that, New York State, just sent out, like a little, memo to a lot of the building inspectors, basically noting like which areas need to require some sort of like building permit or some sort of review. And so some of that is starting to be worked, and this is some of that language is worked into these particular regulations. So this is, again, very similar to, could the state, I heard somewhere along the line, the state is looking to develop a model law, you know, in terms of EV charging, but they haven't come out with it yet. And so this is a little bit of a framework that I think at least gives the town some parameters in terms of what would be required for review and what would be required for in terms of permitting through the building department, as well as what types of regulations everybody needs to look at before those different levels of EV charging gets installed.
Thank you. Charlene, is your question related to your comment? Okay, so let's.
No, it's not related to my
Oh,
comment.
okay. Okay.
It's related specifically to the advertisements, because I know some places have done that. It's really new. And some of the municipalities are sort of requiring a bidding on it, and also requiring some money back from the advertisements. So it's funny that you should bring that up. I don't know how you would deal with it in the zoning code.
I don't necessarily know about like in the zoning and requiring certain, you might want to have like a fee structure, right? That would probably be
Right.
in something in the town fee
Yeah, because
structure that you
Yonkers
could
is
require.
doing that.
We're working with Yonkers on that, so that they have not proposed that at this point in time. So Yonkers is looking to develop EV charging regulations at this point.
Right. And yeah, and one of the issues is that, however, you know, it's an interesting, it's a very interesting question.
It is, and so ironically, there's a company called Volta, which is actually contacting a lot of municipalities to install the EV charging stations, which has the advertisements associated with them.
Yeah, so it's coming soon to your town.
Exactly. So.
Yeah. Dan, is this general comments before
Yeah, I
we?
was just gonna follow just like the advertising thing, and really, if we're talking about charging a fee, then that would be for town facilities. But if it's just in general, if a private party is putting one of these things in,
Yeah.
you know, it's got advertisement. That's another matter, and it's not for us to charge a fee on that. I don't think, anyway.
Of course.
So,
Of course.
so just trying to distinguish those two scenarios. That's all.
Got it. Jan, general comment before we jump into the.
Yeah, and again, I'm following up on advertising. I know at one point, so I don't mind so much visual advertising as long as maybe there's a light of, you know, some kind of how bright it is, but I am really concerned about noise, advertising with noise. I think some of you might have gone in the past to some of those gas station pumps that had advertisements playing, and you could hear them, you know, even by a busy road. It was pretty echoey. So if there is something like that, I think we need to make sure that there's some noise, some limited amount of, well, I'd rather see no noise, but I think it should be regulated.
Okay. Let's jump into the biggest area of discussion was just towards the end, is just talking about this minimum clearance.
Right, and you can see this, if you scroll down, I added a diagram, and this is from the siting design guidelines. And again, this is a suggestion. But I thought it was a good suggestion in terms of making sure, because one of the things we actually, in speaking with some fire departments associated with this, the biggest concern is not so much if the box itself has, has a fire, it's really then the car catches fire and then another car catches fire, right? So then it becomes this, it could become a very, a reactive type of situation. And so I think the more space you have between some of the conduits and, the better it is in terms of any sort of fire suppression, and then also other issues that might need to be in terms of maintenance and stuff like that. So that's why we were suggesting the 36 inch clearance.
Thank you.
Does that answer, Jan, you had a question too?
Yeah, so I think one of the things, I'm not sure which way the 36 inches is, but one of the questions we had when we did see something that came before the planning board is why the units themselves were so close. And it was that you had to allow for someone who might be in a wheelchair to be able to reach the unit and get it to the car without having to go up onto a sidewalk or anything. So it was sort of the opposite. It was to put the charging unit as close to the car as possible. So or as close to the parking area, even if the car didn't go up that close, so that there would be room for a person in a wheelchair to be able to reach the unit. And that was a requirement by somebody I don't know whether that was a state code or what happened, but that was I don't know how that fits into your diagram there. I just wanted to bring it up.
So there was the ADA accessible parking. There is a diagram for that, and I can add that in there. But it really was basically this diagram plus the extra, I think it's like a foot or two on typical space on either side of the parking space. So I can add the diagram if you'd like into this as well.
Can't hurt anybody. Yeah, I think that's fine.
And again, if a model law comes out with, New York State, and they might have some other suggestions, but this is what we have best at this point in time. And since you are updating your zoning, I just suggest that we start working some of these other additional regulations into your zoning in terms of EV charging.
Sam?
So first of all, I'm not quite getting this diagram. This 36 inches is to the curb. So then the charging apparatus is on the car side of the curb, on I guess the this extent part of the parking lot or something like that. I'm not sure that's
I mean, bottom line is they're suggesting that there's clearance around the battery charging station.
the EV charging station.
I mean, the EV charging station. Sorry.
Yeah, so I'm just concerned that I think we can talk about clearance, but yet the sort of specifics of each site are going to be different, and there's going to be at least it looks like there's going to be, especially in your Yonkers case, because we're working on that on our site as well, is new forms which are almost like parking meters or something, little poles that are because you need on-street charging if you're going to get at the next wave of EV drivers, because they don't have garages or they're whatever. So there's going to be different formats, and if it's a sideways orientation, you're obviously not going to be able to go out further into the road and whatnot. So just be a little caution about fixing that too strictly here without knowing those details.
So, I mean, if you want to remove any sort of clearance, I mean, we can. I mean, that's just,
Or just
Again.
some kind of general reference to adequate clearance
we can do that.
or something like that.
Does anybody else have any thoughts or questions about that specific item or more broadly this?
Yeah, I agree. I think being more general about the clearance requirements is better, not so specific, because I think things are going to continue to change and evolve, and we see different sort of units coming out that have different pieces
Right.
on it.
Okay.
The other thing is so in Richfield, they put in something that said every time you build a new parking lot with 20 or more spaces, at least 10% have to have, so in that case, it would be 2, have to have some EV charging capability. That's again, I think a town board decision, but I think encouraging more EVs when a new parking lot is built makes a lot of sense to me. And again, it's Richfield, so I'm not, it's something that's being done close by, albeit by a town that has a lot more parking lots than Lewisboro.
I'm gonna let Dan go next.
Oh, I left it up, but I did want to just comment though that I agree with what Jan said, but I imagine that's something that you want to include like in the parking section or some other section as opposed to here, maybe. This is about how to put in a charging station,
Right.
not that,
Yeah, we do have that parking section we'll come to later tonight.
Right.
Okay. Any other comments about the EV charging? Okay. Let's move to solar now.
Sorry, one quick comment, and this maybe goes for this and a few other things. When we're ready with this, maybe we consider sending it out to a couple of EV installer folks, that we're working with or whatever, anybody, just to say, hey, do you see anything in this that's like going to make it impossible for you to work? Just since this is a new area for all of us, just to get one more pair of eyes on this in case we inadvertently built something in this that's unworkable.
Do you have those? Does anybody have those contacts ready to go? Because I wouldn't want that to hold up the process.
Yeah, we can send that right out. We're talking to them for the the charger business now. We've got Flow and Blink and a couple other folks that we can send this to.
Let me clean it up and then I'll send it to you and then you can send it out.
Great.
Okay.
Okay. Solar. Valerie, you want to give an overview of this one?
Again, I started with the New York State model law and then tweaked it for the town of Lewisboro. So and again, I think the important pieces deal with the, where we're proposing the different tiers and then the acreage sizes. And for the most part, again, I kept the, tier 1 is pretty much all zoning districts. Tier 2 is allowed as long as you meet the minimum lot size in the zoning districts. And then tier 3 is not permitted in the residential districts, but is permitted in the commercial districts. And I know Jan, I believe, raised question on this particular one dealing with sizes, so we can get to that.
Okay. Does anybody have any questions or comments about the minimum lot size requirements or the districts where it's allowed? I think that's a good place to start. I didn't see any comments on it from the pre-work. Okay. Then I think most of the questions here were just were from Dan, just given his day job here. He's got the technical questions, but I know, Valerie, you haven't had a chance to look at those yet. So do you want to take that offline, or how should we deal with that?
So I mean, some of these, I think, I think some of the things that Dan took a look at, I mean, or raised, I think are more like, I'm going to say they're not substantive in terms of the process. And I see Judson has a comment too. So I think those I can easily probably tweak. But let's see what Judson has to say.
No, and Valerie, to the point that the same, the same definitional issue with regard to facility area is in the tier 3 solar provision. And the point that Jan made about disturbance and exempting wetland activity. It's section G2. It just however we decide to address that.
Right, we'll do
in
it
connection
there too.
with,
Yeah.
yeah, do the same here.
Thank you.
Was that bad or yeah? Mhm.
And I thought Jan had a comment. I think scroll up. I felt like he had one in terms of the overall size. Maybe it was a different.
I did not see anything from you on it here. I think the one comment from Dan I think we should chat about as a group is, yeah, I don't see anything from Jan.
Okay, maybe it was the other one that I was thinking of. Okay.
Just this comment from Dan I think we can talk about as a group, just because it is actually content related. Oh, you don't think so, Dan?
No, I'm just thinking it was pretty trivial because it is also the wording harmonious is used elsewhere as well. I just thought we were hammering on that so much, and it's kind of a subjective word, so maybe just to de-emphasize it a little bit. It's not critical. It's
Okay.
not, yeah.
Okay. Did you have? Oh, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I think for the most part, when I was developing this in terms of the tier 3, I sort of imagined most of this, and that's why we focused on the non-residential districts, that most of this would go in under like your parking lots in terms of like potential parking lot canopies, as opposed to like solar farms on like green fields or, forested land. And that's why the tier 3, I specifically focused on the non-residential districts to try to kind of push for your parking lots to potentially have those types of, solar canopy type of things, as opposed to some of the other zoning districts.
Do you have a question or comment, Dan?
Yeah, just kind of just reinforcing again the readability thing, and making sure that we're associating, the appropriate things together, like areas where we talk about screening and landscaping wouldn't apply to a canopy-based parking solar unit that goes in a shopping center or something like that. Just which again should be obvious, but you don't want to have, people looking at that and trying to figure it out if you could,
Yeah.
So other than that, not a lot of, actually, I don't think anything I had here was like terribly technical. But I was just a matter of my own education. There's a reference at the end there to special permit and I'm just curious, does the incorporation of that paragraph suddenly turn this into, or, tier 3 applications into a special permit application? And if so,
Yes,
it does. Okay.
yes. And that's going to be, the special permit application is actually going to be town board approved, and same
And-
with the battery energy storage.
Okay, and where do we indicate that it's the town board? Is that a separate place where we have?
Yeah, so under the special permit, it refers to the section of the special permit, and I can also put it in here as well to also emphasize it. But under the special permits now, it lists both battery energy
Right.
storage and solar for those requirements.
Okay, great. That was just for my education. Yep. And it's just those additional items that
Yes,
constitute the content above and beyond what's applicable in here.
that's correct.
And all right.
I'm just sharing on the screen the uses table that shows that too. John?
Yeah, the question is if, and there are not many of these properties in town, but let's say, I don't know, a farm or something that has 10, 20 acres. Does this prevent them from putting in a tier 3 solar, filling up a property with solar panels on the ground?
That's correct, if they're in a residential district.
Is that something we want to do? I mean, if you got 10 or 20 acres.
That's up to the town. I was suggesting that as like a first step, to focus on, more or less purposely focus on your parking lots and already paved areas, as opposed to some of your farmlands and the more residential areas.
Yeah.
Am I looking at that? Do I have the right place on the screen that shows that? Okay.
Well, I mean, basically residential districts, yes, because it's not permitted, and that's where most of your farms are located. Or if not all.
I
your
personally
farms.
think that's a incorrect limitation, but that's just my opinion. I know people that have like 12 acres and have put these things in, not in our town, but in other places. So just a thought.
Yeah, I tend to agree with that.
Would that be a tier 3?
So
If it's over 900 square feet
yeah,
of panels.
Yeah, that's true.
I mean,
But
if that-
as long as it's invisible to the public, like. And
well, that's the difficulty, like, because when you start saying invisible to the public, right, it would have to be invisible to the public right away, and somebody's going to see it, right? So, we can easily add it and have the same tier 3, same requirements as like the other ones. That's really up to the town, how you want to proceed.
okay, I'll contemplate that a little.
Jan?
Yeah, so I was going to say, as it stands, that would be a use variance, which would be really hard to get. But maybe there would be a way to say, to make it into a size variance I don't know whether it's even legal to explicitly say, however, the zoning board can look at this in areas that are over 20 acres of size or something. I'm just trying to figure out if there's a way to allow a permitting board to perhaps consider it.
I think the only way, Jan, would be it's either going to be permitted or not permitted. And if you want to permit it in residential districts, the way to do it would be by special permit with a very strict set of dimensional, lot size, really kind of carve out what within a residential district would work. as part of the special permit criteria. And I think that's really the only way to do it.
That's very helpful. And again, I defer to the town board, but I'm sort of hearing some thought that maybe in some restricted circumstances, it might be valuable. I don't know.
Yeah, and the 900 square feet is not super huge. You know, so maybe that's, you know, we could stretch that a little bit.
So, I think, I mean, we can stretch the 900 square feet for like tier 2 and increase that a bit if you prefer. You know, that's fine. I mean, we can, I mean, we still have requirements that they have to meet setbacks and stuff like that. So, you know, ultimately, you know, if somebody comes in and says they want, like, I mean, we could even go up to like 5,000 square feet. I mean, it's really up to this board, but if you really are looking at something that where you want like a solar farm, then that would be a tier 3. If you want to allow a solar farm within your community, I mean, we could, you know, require instead of 4 acres, 10 acres, 12 acres, but you probably are going to want, I mean, but are you okay with all 10 acres becoming like a solar farm, or do you want something only a smaller percentage of that, right? So that's where it gets a little bit more dicier in terms of what does the town really want and what will they be willing to permit.
I mean, maybe this is a start, and then if we hear from people that would, or as we go forward, we say, maybe there's a special permitting process for larger. I don't know how many areas have big areas, but I'm just thinking we did have one applicant that I don't think they came in front of the planning board, but they did put on a ground-based solar for their household, you know, a solar array. And I suspect it might be bigger than 900 square feet. And it was just a planning board, not planning board, it was a building inspector review, was out of the wetlands. It never came in front of us. So, you know, I don't know. Maybe the 900 is the limit, or maybe there's a special permit thing in the future. If it gets, when you start saying 5,000 square feet, I get worried about having that on, you know, a 3-acre lot.
If anyone wants to reference the barn roof at Onitru, the big barn roof on just the one side is 70 feet long by, we could get about 20 feet, so about 1,400 square feet. So the 900 square feet would be, you know, 2/3 of that barn roof, you know, just as a kind of a
Right.
size reference there.
So
yeah, so I could see
the
going,
tier 2. Do you want to do that? Do you want to increase it to like 2,500 square feet?
I would be open to that, especially we have all the screening requirements and all that.
yeah, me too. It sounds, I'd go bigger.
This
Yeah,
is in the definitions document where this would change.
No, we would change. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Jan.
I think we need leave it as it is and let the town board decide what it's going to be. I think we start small, and if we want to grow it or change it, that's fine. But at least it's in there and it's a starting point. I don't think it's a good idea to start at 2,500 square feet. I think 900 square feet is conservative and it's a good start. And you let the town board decide before that goes into final draft to a public hearing, that, you know, what it's going to be.
I guess I'm just saying, I think it's bigger than that now. I think people are putting in facilities, or, you know, their own private solar. It's not a commercial thing, but it's their own private things that are larger than that today. So this would be further restricting it.
Right, but I'm sure at the time that I'm saying 900 is a starting point. I'm sure there's going to be people who already have their systems and they're going to come and they're going to give us examples, or we can go to the building department and ask what's already been done. But I mean, I'm sure those that already exist would be grandfathered in. It's not going to be, oh, well, sorry, you got to take down your 2,500 square foot solar panel farm or whatever, and you can only have 900 square feet. I mean, it's just, I think this is a good starting point. I'd rather start smaller than larger. And then we can work out the fine details of pre-existing. And also, you know, we talked about the farms, we talked about the pieces of property that are bigger in acreage, where something like that makes more sense. I mean, look, most of our town is residential. There's very little commercial in our town. So this is going to affect a majority of the town and what's permitted. I think we're at a good starting point.
I hear and I agree that nobody is going to get told they'll be grandfathered in, but I do think 900 just sounds very small to me. It is a town board decision, I grant that, but we are making a recommendation to the town board. So maybe to highlight that this is an area of discussion, because I guess I would love to know what some of the ones that have been permitted and exist today, how big they are.
Why don't we ask Kirsten? Kirsten would be able to give us some information in terms of what was already permitted in the residential districts, and just see if for some reason we're really off mark.
Okay.
Definitely, I can do that.
Just out of curiosity, we're building on something that already exists, or we're creating a whole new section here?
New section, the current section is, you know, completely obsolete and never really worked in the first place.
Right. So should I presume that those solar systems that have already been approved and installed really are under the umbrella of permanent structures as opposed to specific to solar panels, right? So it's like if someone wanted to build a, you know, an overhanging permanent structure over a porch, or a shed, or an ice skating rink, that those all fall within the same permanent structure type. Okay.
Okay. Good. I think that's all good discussion, but yes, ultimately, ultimately, yeah, the actual decisions on the numbers here will be up to the town board, and we just want to make sure that we give them a good starting point. But I think that's where we're going to pause here is exactly that. Does anybody have any other comments or questions about the solar energy?
Yeah, just I had one comment on here, just to note that our currently, if it's just a rooftop system, there's a, you know, simplified application process. As I note here, a lot of the towns have adopted the New York State universal permit. We did not originally, because our system at the time, we had some ancient system with 3 carbon copies and whatever, and like, you know, yeah. So anyway, but we do have something, I think it's called like the auxiliary equipment form, which is also a very, you know, a more simplified process. So I'm just wondering, when I look at all this and I'm thinking of the average homeowner and coming in just to do a normal rooftop system, you know, is there a way to not have to have them wade through all this and say, does this apply to me, that apply to me, and just direct them very quickly to that auxiliary equipment form or whatever it is? Or, you know, maybe there's 1 or 2, you know, new things we want to point out here in some way, but to really distinguish it somehow so that they don't look at this and throw up their hands and say, oh my God, you know, I don't know.
Well, I mean, when you get down to just E, it just says reporting requirements for solar one systems, tier one solar systems shall be permitted in all zoning districts and the town's accessory use and shall be subject to the issuance of a building permit under section 220-75 of this chapter and the following conditions. And then it just talks about the roof mounted. So it's comes.
So that's pretty simple. Can we move it up to the top somehow? Because otherwise, they've got, as I say, even especially, given the lack of sort of headers that are really helpful there.
Well, I mean, so I think that the lack of headers is just, I have to boldface some of these things, but the first is authority, right? So that always goes first. The second is statement of purpose, so that you usually state the purpose of a regulation. And the third is applicability, right? So it's just explaining what is applicable. And then you have the general requirements. So, and then right after that goes right into the tier one. So
I guess, yeah, all right. I mean, it's just, I'm just really sensitive to not.
Well, I mean, the thing is, you can have on your town of Lewisboro website, right, for under building permit forms, they could just say rooftop solar application,
yeah.
right? And because 9 times out of 10, people will just go to the form and they won't even look at the code.
You're right. You're right.
I mean,
Fair enough.
But to be honest, like that's usually where people go first. And then,
fair enough. Yep. All right.
And I think the bolding will help a lot too.
Yes.
I'm calmer now.
Okay, any other questions on solar before we move on, or comments? Okay. Let's go to streets and sidewalks. You want to give an overview of this one, Valerie?
So I think the concern was that in the site plan section of the zoning, there was questions as to whether we can add some sidewalk maintenance regulations and sidewalk. And really, we looked at your town code and we felt that really didn't belong in the zoning. The zoning can refer to this, but you have a whole streets and sidewalks chapter. And so we specifically made a section there for sidewalk maintenance and repair to specifically go into your streets and sidewalks chapter.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, Judson, I don't know what your thoughts are, but we felt that was more appropriate than in the zoning.
No, I agree.
Okay.
Yeah.
I didn't see any questions or comments on the proposed Article 3 maintenance. Would anybody want to bring anything up here? Okay, that's great.
I think this is one of the easy ones.
Yeah, fantastic. Okay. Any lingering thoughts or questions before we move on? Okay. So short-term rentals, this is another one where, where we want to arrive at a nice starting point for the town board. But a lot of the decisions are policy decisions and are ultimately going to be made at that level. That being said, Valerie, do you want to give an overview of what you were going for and how you arrived at what we're seeing here?
All right, so if you recall, we had a matrix of questions that we sent out to the group. Everybody responded. So basically we took those parameters and turned that into what you see as the short-term rental regulations for your review. More summary of all this is that we are permitting them. They will be required on an acre or more of property anywhere in the town. What we are suggesting though is that you have limitations in terms of that they can be no more than 30 days in terms of a lease, and that they cannot be rented out for more than a 90-day calendar period. So this kind of requires then somebody to more or less be a primary residence of that unit and as opposed to like an LLC or somebody coming in, buying a property and then just using it as an Airbnb. So that was pretty much, and also that we specifically added in there about condominium associations and homeowners associations, because we wanted to specifically make sure that, you know, especially with the lake communities, that, you know, it's something that if for some reason certain lake communities have certain, or homeowners associations, condominium associations have certain requirements that they want to require, that they have that ability to do that as well.
Okay, and point of clarification, how is this different or not from like bed and breakfast or
So
other
bed and
rental
breakfasts,
rooms?
bed and breakfasts allow for, you know, the bed and breakfasts are specifically year round, right? And it's up to 14 days. And so this is that's really more of an establishment of, I am planning to have continual, you know, I'm sorry, I'm losing my continual customer, like not customers, I'm hitting a blank, but people staying at the bed and breakfast. So that is, it's really meant to be a commercial enterprise as opposed to an Airbnb or some sort of other short-term rental. It's really meant to be maybe an auxiliary to the, you know, to like, but it's not meant to be a commercial situation all year round.
Okay. And is there any other renting of rooms stuff in the code that is?
So there is one other parameter of renting of rooms under, I think it's supplementary regulations, but depending upon how we settle this, then I will refer to the short-term rentals in terms of this.
Okay, got it.
Or bed and breakfast, right? So like that, depending on, because I think the renting of rooms specifically, we're dealing with the agriculture. So that might be like more of a bed and breakfast scenario versus the short-term rentals. Now, again, in other communities, they have decided to allow for short-term rentals period all year round, and other ones even require owner occupancy in order to have short-term rentals. I didn't do the owner occupancy. We kind of focused on, but the no more than 4 months. So it does require some sort of like permanent occupancy to a larger extent.
Okay. So Jan, do you have a general comment? Okay, before we dive into the specifics.
Yeah, so I wanted to ask two things. One is the 90 days. Is that, I guess I'm not clear about that. If I can, I'm wondering if I could rent every single weekend, which would, you know, except for a couple, and that would be, you know, because there's 52 weeks in a year, so I could rent for 45 weekends and 2 nights, or is that a 90-day period?
No, it's you could rent 42 weekends and it's 90 days throughout the
Okay.
calendar.
So you can, so it could be year round in that case. It was the discussion of year round versus a 4-month period. So, okay, so that's
I meant year round as in 365 days.
okay. But so that would basically allow people to operate almost every weekend. Okay, I just trying to make sure what that was. The other question I have, and this is just, so is the 1 acre limitation, that is something that could go, that's an aerial variance, so that could go to the zoning board and they could give a variance to somebody who's on a 1/4 acre?
No, I mean, right now, this could be a standalone regulations, and so then you don't necessarily have to vary it. Right? Correct, Judson?
Correct. If it's not placed within the context of the zoning code, and there's no, you know, specific variance process built into this chapter, then it doesn't go to, the only thing the zoning board can hear are in terms of variance relief, or relief from variance regulations, or no, I'm losing it.
Zoning regulations.
Zoning regulations. Yeah.
Okay, that's really helpful. So the 1 acre really does have some real
Indeed.
teeth here.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Dan?
Yeah,
General-
so,
general
so
question?
when oh, sorry. Okay.
Sorry, I was just clarifying general question as opposed to one specific in the document.
I was following on with what the conversation
Go for it.
I think, but tell me, just on the 1 acre thing, I mean, clearly that means here in these like lake communities that most properties are excluded. And this is actually the area where there's the most interest and demand, and we're seeing the most. We already have in our neighborhood here, the Cove Road, Lakeview, I think there's like 4 or 5, on Old Pond already. And so if this is enacted, all is there a grandfathering? Do they, or do they? And so I mean, another approach to sort of putting some limits on it was I've heard of like a limit and the percentage of a street frontage that are taken up by these things, or some other measure which assures that your neighborhood will not be completely taken over by these or something.
Right, so we have language in, it's under section 4H. Yeah, right,
There it is, 4H.
H, where it says the town board in its discretion and by resolution may establish a maximum number of STR
Okay.
permits to be issued within the town or within a specified area of the town. So you can create a resolution to restrict that.
So that might be
we-
something that's adjusted from time to time.
Yes, and
Okay.
the thing is, we started off with 1 acre because that's what was suggested in the matrix. You could reduce it, but I think at this point, I think that was one of the concerns, is that it is becoming something more prevalent in the lake communities. And it seems to be that's a little bit of a disturbance, especially in the smaller properties. So we were suggesting, if this is going to take place in the larger properties, is really where you would allow for maybe this type of operation.
And I think the case could be made that there's a level of arbitrariness to that, which says that, oh, I own a property that's smaller than that. I don't get to avail myself of this vehicle. And it could very well be that the smaller properties could be, by definition, there are not definition, but the likelihood that there are people who are financially not as well off and could use this somehow, could go up. So I'm just concerned that there's a lack of sensitivity to that. Even though I'm not like this, hugely excited about this, I want to make sure it's sort of fair and works well,
Well, I think, right, so I think that, again, that's a town board decision, and that can easily be adjusted in the way we have the overall framework of the short-term rental regulations.
I realize I can't raise my hand as like a participant. I just want to just say really quickly, is the aim of the 1 acre, if the aim of the 1 acre is how close a house is to the street and how close it is to its neighbors, it gets a little wonky because sometimes like a property can have 1 acre, but the house itself is still at the street next to the houses, very close to the houses next to it, but the acreage is behind. So I don't think that 1 acre necessarily kind of solves the problem. Like, you can have more than 1 acre, but still be very close to your neighbors. So I'm not sure the acreage is like the right goalpost. Just in my opinion. Jen?
Yeah, so I apologize. It wasn't clear to me. Did we say that if we put in this law that existing ones under 1 acre would be grandfathered in, or would they not be?
No, they wouldn't be. They would
Okay.
be, you could ticket them violations, or, so they would not be grandfathered, right? Because they would have to do a rental, they would have to actually register And so everybody would have to then start following the regulations of the new law that would be adopted.
Thank you. And then to the point Dan was making, I guess I'm sensitive to the fact of affordability, but I think the people that are buying houses by the lakes now, the small ones, and making them into Airbnbs, are the cost of houses adjacent to the lakes is probably prohibitive I mean, we're seeing LLCs buy them and not people who are suffering, you know, people who are buying multiple homes to do this. I don't think I would put them in a category of being, you know, impoverished. So I hear what you're saying, but I don't think that's here relevant. I think
Get one.
Then perhaps we can be more surgical. Like if that's what the town wants to avoid is the LLCs buying up property and then just renting them out. There's a way we can limit that by focusing on LLCs as opposed to the acreage, which then we do limit somebody who has smaller than 1 acre and wants to rent out when they're on vacation so that they can get a little supplemental income. Like then we're not limiting them from doing that just because we're worried about LLCs.
Right. So I think they're two separate things. So we actually do kind of hit the LLCs by saying you can only rent out 90 days out of the calendar year. Right. So if you're an LLC buying a property, you're not operating on the fact that you can only have income 90 days out of the year on that property. Right. So the idea is that it is supposed to be for like supplemental or somebody renting it out for like a weekend or a week while they're away, that type of thing. So that's where we have the Section 5 requirements and restrictions on use and occupancy. The property restriction was mostly because that's what the feedback we received in the matrix of 1 acre. But again, that could be changed. I think the LLC is really where we take care of that in Section 5.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Other questions, comments?
So to be clear, the folks who have bought these things as LLCs, and if their business model is no longer works with this code, that's on them.
Right. I mean, theoretically, they could rent out the property for the 8 months out of the, right? Like, let's just say they do a long-term rental, but I think that's okay, right? Like, I think the town is okay with if somebody's coming in and has like, and renting the house for like 6 months, you know, or 8 months, they're a little bit more of a semi-permanent resident versus somebody who's coming in for like a weekend, just to rent. And then the property just becomes one of those, every week there's a new renter. So I'm hearing that we might want to consider reducing the 1 acre. Well, Jan disagrees, but so.
I think we're in the same spot we were with, you know, the 900 square feet is like, what's the starting point we want to send to the town board? Oh, Charlene, you have your hand raised. Go ahead. All right, you're on mute.
Is it just for this or other comments on it?
Yeah, go ahead. Mm-hmm.
Okay, I have two then. One is if one leases, if they're a lessee, can they also then lease it out on short-term basis?
Yeah, I answered your question now because it has to be the property owner that pulls the registration.
Okay. And secondly, if you have different properties on,
Right.
you know, you have,
It's only one.
It's only one. Okay.
Yes. So an SRT is limited to one rental at a time. The rental or leasing of a property or any portion thereof to more than one rental party during the same time period is prohibited.
Okay. Do they need different permits for each of the outbuildings, or do they need just one permit for the whole property?
It would be one permit because you can only have one STR at any point in time.
Okay. Thank you.
Does anybody else have any questions or comments?
Yeah, just say this is another one of those ones gonna be hard to enforce in the sense of like who's counting the days. I'm imagining that interested neighbors might, but how do you document, oh, there was somebody there on that day, you know?
Well, we do have specific, there's another section where we, let me just find it.
Permit.
Oh, here.
In the, right, in the enforcement. Hold on, sorry, let me just find it. Oh, so we do have something like, so for example, like operation without a permit. It does talk about like if any sort of advertising or, like, so basically, you know, somebody could, you know, it's very simple to do like Airbnb or, you know, VRBO, like, or to just take a look at what properties are being advertised for, right? So it's easy to be able to catch like certain properties don't have their registrations or their, you know, so once somebody gets in and really starts and having to register, I think you're going to find that, you know, they're going to comply more than somebody that's just posting their unit on one of the websites without going to the town and actually officially registering.
Good, all right.
And I can tweak that operations without a permit and kind of tweak it so that it's like operations and I don't know. I'll come up with some wording, maybe work with Judson on it, but just basically
Okay.
that you can
And-
use kind of the same similar techniques to be able to say, gee, that they're, you know, operation without a permit or outside of the permit boundaries or something like that, or permit like calendar windows, that you could use those same types of techniques, right? If you know something has been rented out and then you keep seeing it throughout, you know, that's probably an indication that they're going beyond their 90 days.
And maybe even advertising it without a permit could be a minor infraction.
Right, well, it is, right, because
Yes.
advertising without a permit can be a violation to this, yes.
Yes, okay.
So is it the building department that's responsible for?
Yes.
Okay. I think, yeah, please
But the
reference
actual-
all the discussion before about septic, that I think that
Right.
the big difference with this is that neighbors' complaints will prompt enforcement action, whereas septic is relatively invisible and you're not getting the same neighbor complaints.
Right, and this, there is, like, the town board will have to approve this, right? Approve the short-term rentals. It's not an automatic, just go to the building department. We do have a process in here where, you know, once the building department receives an application, we do have that they would notify the neighbors of like the application, and the neighbors would be able to respond or provide comments in writing, and then that application along with any comments from the neighbors would go to the town board, and the town board could schedule a public hearing if you wanted to, but you don't have to. Like, let's just say it's a property that they got no responses from any of the neighbors and you feel comfortable with what's being proposed, you don't necessarily have to, but again, it does allow for the town board to decide to have a public hearing or not, but it would be a town board approved process, so that way it just adds a little bit more, I guess, stringent requirements than if it's just like a building permit process. And I think it also takes it out of the planning board, but we suggested that on purpose because, you know, I think this is more of like a neighbor issue as opposed to like site plan issues in terms of the short-term rentals.
So I must have misunderstood that. So this proposes that every application for a short-term rental has to be approved by the town board.
That's correct.
I don't think that's gonna work, but okay.
I mean, we
I-
can, I mean, if you
I
want
don't
to
think
change
that's
it.
practical. Well, no, I mean, this is only a recommended, I just don't think it's practical to have it, because no, for every application, there will be a neighbor who doesn't want an Airbnb
That's
next to
correct.
their house.
Yes.
And then the town board is gonna have to decide every single time, yes or no, when there's always going to be an objection. I don't think that that's this,
Well, I
I
think
don't
the
think it's gonna
objection
work.
has to be substantive at some level, right? Can't just be like, oh, I mean, we still have a code.
Yeah, I mean, the code says, I mean, this recommended code is really specific and pretty strict. I don't really think having the town board approve every single application is the way to go for this type of rental. I
So-
think it's an application process and it's restrictive.
So we can do a couple different things, right? So you could just say it just automatically goes to the building department, right? And they can just issue the permit. The other option is we could work into here where we have the initial setup that the building inspector notifies the neighbors. If there are very specific complaints, then it requires town board approval. That's another option. So it doesn't have to go to the town board at all, unless for some reason there are very specific, concerns or responses from the neighbors, or we could just do they go to the building permit. I mean, excuse me, the building department, and they issue the permit.
I mean, in my opinion, I think it's just a building permit application, but I could be open to if notifying the neighbors, and then if there are specific complaints, then it comes before the town board. That way, it's not every single application, but I think that means that we have to come up with a pretty strict review process, you know what I mean? Because the town board then gets put in the position of saying, oh, I like this short-term rental, but I don't like that short-term rental, or this person complained harder than that person, so we're going to grant it here, but we're not going to grant it there. I think it puts the town board in a very difficult spot. So there would have to be, I think, certain criteria, for the town board to follow in order to make such an approval. Otherwise, I don't really think, sorry, Janet, I don't really think the town board should be approving them on a case-by-case basis. I think that doesn't work in the long term.
So if you go to scroll down, Katie, in section F, it talks about the different criteria for approvals for the town board. You just passed it. Scroll back up.
Oh, here we go.
Yeah. So one of the things what we could do is if you want, like, if in terms of complaints from neighbors and something that has to go to the town board, maybe we could work in some language that the complaints have to be beyond, like, if it's something that can be dealt with in terms of regulations that are already within the short-term rental regulations. So let's say somebody says, I'm worried about parking, but yet they already showed that there's adequate parking on the site, then that's something that the building department can say, no, we've already taken care of that. But let's just say somebody has something very specific in terms of like their site or where their house is located, or maybe they have like a shared driveway. I'm just making it, but like
I own a dog, and the dog gets upset when new people come in to.
I mean, we can just work it as a permit. If you just want a straight, if you would like, we can send it to the town board as like a permitting process, as with all the regulations that are required, and the same items that the town board would have to look at in terms of whether the application is ready to be approved. That's what the building department can look at, and we can start there. And if the town board wants to move so that they actually have more regulations in place in terms of other boards reviewing, then we can change it at that point.
Darlene?
Yes. I guess I'm okay to change it to the building department. I'm kind of
If
easy
you-
either way. I don't think we're gonna be overwhelmed with these, but any individual one could get thorny, I guess.
Darlene?
It seems to me, but just based on experience, because this is always controversial in many places. If you solely have the building inspector do it, and then he in turn has a violation that goes to the court, it seems that it's not going to be very effective. That's my input. If it doesn't have some follow-up within the town itself. And not in the court system.
Well, we do have the ability for the permits to be, well, there's enforcement and violations, but we do have the ability for the grounds for the denial of a permit, and then also like application for renewal of a permit, so that you know, that permits can be denied or revoked, and so that's in the current regulations right now.
Okay, that does something.
Dan?
So I understand if the town board is, leery of getting at this, I'm just trying to figure out, and I'm not looking for any more work on the planning board, but I don't know if there's another board that might be able to take this on, or whether even a short-term rental board or something could be established that would, probably not housing. I'm just trying to think. I really do think it might be valuable to have, at least, especially while we're getting going, to have somebody look at these and try to have some sense of how many there are coming through, what kind of, what kind of situations there are that are coming through. I think it would be valuable if we're actually trying to do that. So I think some board or some, and if the town board doesn't want to do it, I understand, but I think there should be somebody looking at it as and sort of having a record of how many are coming. I mean, the building inspector would do that, but to have a review process that's sort of public, I think would help. And that's the major difference between, to my eyes, between going to the building inspector, which is, I'm not saying he does anything out of context, but it's not a public meeting. And I think there's a value to having a public meeting where this is looked at, and especially as a new law. Maybe after a while we figure, okay, we've got this sort of locked and loaded. We understand exactly how this works. We understand the parameters. They seem to be working. Okay, let's now change it so it's just building inspector. But with something so new and not knowing how it's working, I think having a public forum to have it done would be valuable.
So there's nothing stopping us from declaring, within 6 months of enacting this, that the town board, the building inspector will submit the data about the, applications, and the board will review and determine whether or not adjustments need to be made or something like that. That could be a process.
That could be, certainly, but I'm thinking, again, public forum is a little different sometimes than, did anybody send an email? Because
we could add that. Yeah, we could add that as part of it. I mean, we could say that the building inspector should provide this data to the housing committee, and the housing committee could review and make their report and recommendations to the town board.
Well, We could just put a provision in there that said that'll be provided to the town board quarterly for review. And then if there's any problems, we can address them at that point and tweak it or what have you. But again, you know, I don't really think that whether someone's gonna rent out their house as an Airbnb, that needs to come in front of the town board every time someone decides that they wanna use their house as an Airbnb. I think that there's sufficient regulation in what Valerie's drafted that prevents LLCs and corporations from coming in and, you know, which we were afraid of. I mean, there could be a provision, I mean, Val talked about owner occupied, that, you know, that the homes need to be owner occupied so many months out of the year. That's something else that we could consider, but I don't think that getting a permit to use their houses as a short-term rental, I don't think those applications need to be reviewed by a board. I think it's sufficient that they meet the requirements of an application within the building department. We can ask the building department to provide quarterly updates so that we keep our thumb on the pulse of what's going on in the town, and then we can make adjustments accordingly. And then if there's any problems, we reserve the right to revoke their permit. No renewal.
I'm okay
You know,
with that.
so we can, like I said, we can consider that you know, as an additional preventative measure to require owner occupancy for a certain number of months per year. Just my thoughts.
Any other comments or thoughts? Okay. Well, I think do you have everything you need to kind of take that and run with it, Valerie? And
Yeah, I think so.
okay. Okay. So what I'm gonna do is pause here. We got through all of the new stuff for this batch that Valerie was proposing. In terms of the questions and discussions and the tweaks that Valerie's made to the previous batches, based on the stuff we've talked about tonight, I think we already looked at a bunch of it kind of as we were going. Valerie, the only thing to my mind that we haven't touched on yet was, and we might have covered it actually, was under site development plan approval. Did we already address the question about sidewalks?
Yes, I think the one thing we didn't touch upon was the animals.
Right. Okay, so let's do that.
Yeah,
And
I think that's the last of,
Is
I think
that,
that was the last one that people had comments on.
yes, is that supplemental regulations? Or the
No,
district?
district regulations.
Got it, okay. Got it. Okay, great, yeah, so let's look at this one. And
we
then
can
we'll
have a
be,
look out.
and then we'll have gotten through everything. Okay. So do you want to give an overview of this and where it stands right now?
Yeah, so I just want to let everybody know, we did some research. We looked at, there's actually a small farms guide to farming by Cornell University. There was also guidelines for review of local laws affecting nutrient management practices. And also we worked in 2 other communities, Mamakating and Fallsburg, to develop similar types of requirements. And specifically in Fallsburg, there was somebody on the committee there that worked for the New York State Department of Agriculture. So we utilized a lot of their recommendations as well. So that's sort of where we came up with the suggested suggestions on how many acres per bird or per pig. And then we put limitations on, and Jan picked up on it, like it technically is out to the calculations of what you would be allowed on a 10-acre property. And then after that, we've maxed it. But we did that on purpose because I think the town of Lewisboro is not looking for like large scale farming, but just something to be able to add to some of the farms. I think, Katie, you don't have it shown. You still have the short-term rentals up.
Really? Oh, I see. Okay. Yep. Hold on one sec. Have it in a different window. Share. There.
So, and we also, just to let you know, there, some of these actually allowed for more adults per acre in terms of the animals, and we reduced them because we figured that we'd go more on the conservative side for the town of Lewisboro. So these are our suggestions. You know, we're happy to have that discussion and tweak them. But this is our starting point.
Jan?
Yeah, so I have to admit that when I first looked at this, I thought, well, maybe you either have pigs or you have chickens or you have, but what happens if somebody says, I want to have sheep and poultry and ducks and something? Is this additive, or can they have, 30 sheep and 50 chickens and another 50 ducks or whatever,
Right,
all
so
on
we'll
the same?
make sure it's additive, but I think for the most part, farmers that are truly, I mean, they're going to make sure that their animals have adequate space, but we can make sure that it's clear that it's additive.
And can we do something about, I forget now whether this has restrictions about feeding areas separate and manure handling that's keeps it away from streams, or?
Yes, it does.
Okay, because we do have a rescue facility that might end up with a mix of all of these animals in one area.
Right, but if that rescue facility is like 10 acres, you could have multiple animals in one area. If you want, we can increase some of the numbers, but this is where we started with, because right now I don't know how that rescue center got permitted, but right now, if you recall, you had like one, I think your first animals on, if you scroll up, Katie, you'll see where the regulations are.
I don't think it's currently permitted, might be the issue.
No. Go up. Right there. Stop right there. So right now you had not less than 2 acres of land is available for the first animal and 1 acre for each additional animal. So I mean, if this place has a number of different animals on it, I'm not sure if it even meets the requirements currently.
I think that's possible.
Right. So, I mean, I think what we're trying to do is we were trying to come up with something that kind of reflected more of what you would find on an actual farm, as opposed to just like 2 animals, like on a number of acres. So, but the point is, we're happy to adjust it either way. And like I said, we worked on a very conservative situation here.
So can this be in a residential area?
Well, that's where you're allowed your farms, yes.
Right. So
in residential districts, yes.
Yeah, so I think that's the concern. But people can, again, my concern clearly would be having a lot of animals right in the middle of but it's possible that it wouldn't be a farm. It would just be a lot of animals. And that's where I'm curious about.
Because if you scroll up, Katie, this is for specifically ranching and raising of field and garden crops. Right now, if you scroll down to the next section, because there's another section of animals. All right, so this is, this is allowed for the keeping, and this animal type, this is an accessory use under your residential districts, and here, and this is where we're only permitting, if you scroll down, we're only permitting goats, horses, and poultry. Horses are already permitted, so really it's just, we just added poultry and goats. But if you want to get rid of goats and just have poultry, then that's what we're suggesting on like residential districts.
That's helpful. So there's a big difference.
Yeah, that is helpful to understand, although, yeah.
So somebody with a 1/4 acre couldn't have a little chicken coop with 5 hens then. And that's it.
So, the minimum lot size is the underlining zoning acre, underlining zoning district. So
Oh.
so whatever, right. And
But-
so
yeah.
no more than 5 birds on a 1/2 acre. So if they have a 1/4 acre, they can have a couple birds.
A little restrictive potentially, but because, you know, two
Again.
birds is kind of unusual.
Well, I understand that, but you know, this is the first time we're really introducing like,
Yeah.
right? Because before it was not less than 2 acres is available for the first animal and 1 acre for each
No,
additional
well,
animal.
that was
So,
that was
right.
really not going to work. Right.
so that's why, again, I'm happy to increase these numbers. But you know, I figured we'd start small, see how that goes, and then if you want to increase it, you know.
Yeah,
we can
my
do so.
my druthers would be, since you're already allowing the roosters, which are the big issue, you know, you literally 5 hens go in a little coop and a little fence, and like, you know, I think that can be done in a way that doesn't bother anybody.
Right, so we could even change it to, if you did like 10 birds per acre, then you would be able to have like 5 birds for your 1/4 acre. I mean, I'm sorry, I meant if you 10 birds for 1/2 acre, you could have 5 birds for your 1/4 acre.
Yeah, that would be,
Yeah.
I'd suggest something like that.
How do people feel about that? I think that there's a lot of chickens already around. That's
Yeah.
definitely very popular. Okay. Charlene?
Is there a definition, I don't know, is there a definition of farm?
Yes, there is in the definition section.
Okay. Do they have to apply for being a farm, or they just become a farm?
It's in the zoning use table where it has farms. And this is based on your current code, so I think it would be under commercial.
Oh, okay,
What should I search for?
I should look at it.
Scroll up.
I see riding of horses.
Maybe it's ranching. It's called ranching under your code.
Oh, I see. Got
Yeah,
it.
there you go. It's special permit.
Mentioning. A special permit, okay, thank you.
And then it requires, I believe, I forget how many acres it starts off with. It's in the use regulations, it has a minimum of so many acres, I think you have to start.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, it's getting late.
Yeah, I know. So I apologize for not having all the answers.
Does anybody have any other thoughts or questions about the animal limitations we were just talking about? Dan?
Yeah, I guess, so I saw that you put in goats as a supplemental. I know people who keep chickens. I don't know anybody, and every once in a while somebody who might keep a guinea hen, but I don't know of anybody that keeps goats. And I was wondering whether that is
We had a
something.
goat farm on Chapel Road for a while. I think they moved actually, but they had goats.
My
Yeah, but
neighbor
that
on
was a-
Mill River Road has goats and chickens and horses.
Okay, but I guess I'm trying to figure out so we have the kind of ranching operation, which is the commercial-ish one, but this one is as an accessory use. And I'm just, you know, wondering whether we should have people that can have, you know, 3 goats on an acre of land.
Well, this one actually for the goats,
It's 2 acres. you know.
this is 2 acres, right? So this is assuming you have a larger property, but you are not technically a farm.
Okay, but you kind of said, I think having, horses, you know, as you said, is already allowed. Adding chickens or poultry makes absolute sense. I have no real sense of people wanting to keep goats, and that's why I asked the question as an accessory use.
No, there's several people that I know of, at least on the Vista side, they have goats. And I know at least 2 people who have had pigs.
Okay, then that makes sense to leave it in.
Right.
Thank you.
And I've
Now,
seen
again-
cute Facebook videos with people with goats jumping around in their house, so.
Yeah, and again, this is what we're proposing as the starting. If we hear during the public hearings that like people are like, but I have an acre of land and I have like a goat, you know, we can always reduce the minimum acres. But also keep in mind, a lot of your property, and I understand there's the lake communities, but a lot of your property within the town of Lewisboro is zoned 4 acres. And so we started with 2 acres, trying to capture some of the 2-acre properties. But then clearly the R4A, we're saying you have to have the 4 acres. So, I mean, that's up for discussion if you feel that that was too large of acres to start with the goats. I understand maybe the horses, but so.
I think, are we all in agreement that this is with the exception of the chickens which we already increased, this is a good starting point, just given all the research that Valerie and her team put into it? Okay. So I think pausing here, I think the rest of the comments Valerie already did a good job of answering behind the scenes, and there's little tweaks here and there, but nothing substantial on any of these other we're all pretty brain at this point. So I think what we need to do is Valerie has some homework to do to go back, adjust some things, tweak them based on our conversation. My question to the group is, do we feel like we need another meeting to review and then discuss, or can we handle the review behind the scenes on Google Docs before we take the next step, which is referring these to the town board and posting them publicly for people to review? And then Valerie has graciously offered to have office hours to make her and her team available to discuss these and any other lingering questions the public has about the comprehensive plan or the other batch of zoning code changes. But before these are ready to be given to the town board and posted publicly for public input, how do we feel? Raise your hand if you feel like we can handle this offline with our Google Documents prowess. No? Yes? No? Wait, how many is that? 1, 2, 3. Okay, so I think we need another meeting. Okay. All right, so we'll have another meeting. How long do you think you need, Valerie?
We'll probably need. Well, we're getting the comprehensive plan stuff out this week, so I'll probably need like next week to finish up the stuff, and then I don't know when's the next town board meeting.
Their town board, the 26th is the next opportunity in February. So I think squeezing it in before then is not really very realistic.
Right, so we could do. March 4th. I mean, the other option is we could maybe do a tentative, and then once everyone sees I mean, because all I'm going to do is go in and finish accepting the comments and then addressing what we talked about tonight, which I think you might find there's not that many track changes at that point on any one. And then we could have, if there is a particular chapter or section that I get a lot of comments on, we can always plan to have maybe a meeting like on the first Monday of March 4th, just a quick one. But if for some reason everyone's okay with what we suggest, then maybe we can finish it up over Google Docs.
So then when would the target be for getting it to the town board? For their
After that,
March 11th meeting?
it could be, yes.
Okay. Yeah, I think that sounds good. Then why don't we do that? I think Valerie's right. Like when everybody sees it in writing, the changes that she's going to make based on tonight are pretty minimal. It's just cleaning up, removing the comments and making it final. So then, yeah, why don't we review on Google Docs, and we could always have a quick meeting on Monday, March 4th, and whether or not Valerie needs to be there, because we don't want to bust the budget here necessarily. So we can kind of figure out how substantive the discussion is going to be and whether she needs to be there or not.
Well, right. I mean, I'm happy to be there. I mean, if it's going to get this, if there's specific questions, you know what I mean, so that we can get this to the town board, I'm happy to attend the meeting.
Okay. Then what do we think? Where do we think the posting stuff publicly and getting the office hours fits in?
I think if the town board accepts, basically the zoning at that point and says they want to, consider those drafts ultimately for public hearing, then we could have maybe some office hours like the first couple weeks in March, and I can send you, some dates.
Does that sound okay to everybody? That way things can kind of happen alongside each other. I just don't want it to be like we get it to the town board on March 11th and then we have office hours after that, and then we have to have the hearings in April, and now we're sort of like getting much longer timeline. So I think that would work well if everybody's okay with that, of having the office hours the first or second week of March.
The other option is we can see if everyone's comfortable with the changes. Like, so if we get this stuff out this week for the comprehensive plan, and then I give you revisions like beginning of next week, if people can pop in and take a look at them, we could get things over to the town board on the 26th of February. I mean, I think there's a number of things that are pretty much ready to go. I think we're really only dealing with, I don't even know if there was anything really that, I think this septic and sewers was really the one chapter.
Getting them to the town board is like, here they are, this is what you've got in your hands. And then the next step obviously for us is to put it to a public hearing. Question is whether everybody on the board is, going to be comfortable with setting that hearing right away, or they're going to say, wow, there's a lot here. Give us one cycle to look at them, and we'll put them on public hearing. So in which case, if we can get them cleaned up before that, maybe it's possible to get them out to the board beforehand. And if they have at least, a week or, hopefully even more beforehand, and say, here they are, and you'll be able to ask some initial questions, at your next session. And, with the aim to hopefully those that you're happy with to move them into public hearing, et cetera. So in other words, get them to them beforehand so that we don't have that whole additional cycle in there.
Yeah, I mean, we can do that, and then we can plan for, like, I'll talk to Katie and we can plan for some office hours prior to the board, calling for a public hearing, and
Mhm.
also we can have the public hearing maybe out a few weeks, so that gives the board some opportunity to review the zoning a little bit
Right.
more, and then you have the public hearing, and then afterwards I can meet with the town board to go through and make any amendments based upon public comments and then based upon any concerns the town board has.
Are we assuming that the town board is, if and when they decide that they want to make these changes and amendments, that they're all going to be done at once? Because I don't see that happening. There's too many of them.
Mhm.
There's too many of them. I don't see all of the zoning, all the proposed zoning amendments being adopted all at the same time with, I mean, it's taken us weeks and weeks and weeks to go through how many sets of zoning text changes or
Mhm.
recommendations? I don't see the town board doing them all in one vote with
Mm.
public hearing on all. I mean, how do you even manage that? There's so many different topics and so many people with opinions, I expect, that are gonna show up for public hearing that you can't. You need to have a public hearing on each one.
Maybe we need to batch them again.
Yeah,
Valerie, how do you normally do it?
Normally, if zoning is going to be associated with the comprehensive plan in terms of public hearing, it's all done at once. So it would all just, like, all the local laws would go out, they would all get posted, and the public hearing would be on all the local laws at once. That's not to say that you can't separate them, but I think if we're going to separate, then I need to probably talk to Judson, and I will need to kind of
Yeah.
sort out, because a lot of that are
They're
tied to
connected.
they're connected.
Yeah,
Right.
right. That's another issue. Yeah.
but I think they're gonna have to be grouped. There's just so many. There's
I
so
think
many.
that's also why we need the office hours to happen
Yeah.
before the public hearing, so that people have a chance to come and have a one-on-one conversation with Valerie. Because a lot of it'll be like, I have a question about my specific property and how it's impacted by these changes, and Valerie will be able to answer those one-on-one.
Right.
Now, we've also recorded these very sessions that we're on right now, right?
I think I can definitely say that the process, I mean, we've had at the last workshop, I think people came out with their specific concerns, and we've been able to follow up with a lot of them and have those one-on-one dialogues. Like, I think the 3 different rounds of public workshops, I think people have been engaged along the way and kind of are a little bit more in the loop about what's happening. So it's not your average, like, we're just
No, but what I was getting at is that we could actually, if one of the board members has questions about a specific, areas, like a specific one, we can point them minute 30 at, session number 2. We had a real back and forth on this, and you can probably, benefit from taking 15 minutes on that section, and then whatever you have left, to ask us questions.
Yes.
Something
And
like
also
that.
remember that the whole town board has been encouraged to review and comment on every single batch of these zoning proposed changes to the zoning, and everybody's been really for the most part very involved and made comments on each of the rounds. So
That's true.
their questions and comments have been incorporated along the way.
And
There's been plenty of opportunity for there to be.
Right, and I'm happy to have any kind of call or meeting with any town board member to go through any questions that they have as well.
Thank you. Okay, Charlene?
Remember, there's a secret process too, so it's going to have a lot of input from the public and a lot of opportunities. I mean, that,
Well, the
Valerie,
secret
may-
process is not, we're not proposing an environmental impact statement for this, right?
you're not
This
gonna
is
have, but you're gonna have to have a public hearing, no?
what, will it be
Yeah.
part and parcel with the public hearing on the comprehensive plan and the zoning?
Yeah.
It would all be together.
But if we get this stuff out, before that targeted meeting, and at that point also, it's out there for the public, they can start finding the stuff that they're interested in, start aggregating their
Yeah,
questions.
and my point is, it's not going to be one public hearing. I mean, it could be continued. And obviously, if there's a lot of statements that have to be made, then you just continue the public hearing.
Just continue it, yeah. Yeah,
I think, and I think that's what you'll do is you'll have a single public hearing, but you'll basically stage it
Yes.
and deal with this in bite-sized portions.
Right. And
Yeah.
you deal
Right.
with the zoning.
So it's orderly and people get to talk as to each particular
Yeah.
section or issue of
Right.
concern.
like that, yeah.
Okay, and the town lawyer and you, Judson, that you would be advising, you would help the town board kind of put that agenda together, basically.
Yeah.
Okay. Jan?
Yeah, I hear the fact that this seems like we've done a lot, but it seems to me that what we've done is basically taken the comprehensive plan and put it into code, but we haven't so first of all, Valerie, I want to say this is really helpful going through all the code like this and doing all this, but we haven't done some real fundamental huge changes at all to the zoning. We haven't put in, we put a senior overlay zone in, but we haven't taken things that were, 2-acre zoning and made them commercial, and we haven't done, I mean, this is really, it's a very, to me, it's a very orderly updating of the code to go along with the items that were defined in the comprehensive plan. So I hear that it seems like a lot of code changes, but I mean, we haven't updated the code except in bits and pieces for what, 30 years, 40 years? And this is so to me, this is in light of that time span. I mean, we're not making new commercial areas and new industrial areas and changing 2 acres to half acre or vice versa. This is really, so okay, all of that to say, I think while it seems like a boatload of stuff, and I know that I also have a process of getting the planning board through the review, I think it's not, I would encourage, us almost to go the way we've gone through them here. You start with and say, the overall changes in this is we made a table out of what used to be inside the code. So it looks like a lot of change, but it's a table. Okay, here we expanded the number of animals that you can have on a piece of property. Here we, updated telecommunications to what the rules are. So I know it seems like a lot, but when we talk about what we're actually doing for a comprehensive plan, I don't feel like we are making radical changes. And I think that's because that's what people told us. They kind of like the town. They want it to be modernized a little bit and get better telecommunications and do stuff, but they kind of like the town as it is. And I think my concern is,
we hear you.
I'm done. Okay.
Yeah.
No, that was
well,
perfect.
I think that you agree. We all agree completely, and I think we're just a little bit like tonight was slightly different in that there's new stuff tonight, like the short-term rental, and the solar and the batteries. Like that's new stuff that doesn't exist in the code. But this is the first time that we've done that, and that's because the town board authorized additional funding so that this batch could be looked at part and parcel with the others. So tonight was pretty different than our previous meetings. And Jan, you're absolutely right that up to this point, and even including tonight, the changes really are pretty small tweaks. I think that came across very nicely in the workshop. Valerie explained that to the public and people responded and asked questions accordingly. Okay, but I think what I'm hearing overall is that there's no need to rush. We don't want anyone in the public or on the town board to feel pressure to make decisions, quickly just for the sake of doing it quickly. So I think the best thing we can do is just space things out, like have a deadline where we're getting the town board drafts to review, and then have the give them a chance to make any adjustments necessary. In particular, on stuff we talked about tonight, it would be like the septic and the short-term rentals, where they have big decisions to make, and then have the office hours shortly thereafter, and then plenty of time for everybody to review things publicly before the public hearing. Like, I think there's a way to accomplish that. We'll just look at calendars and kind of figure it out. But it sounds like everybody's on the same page about what needs to happen leading up to the public hearings. And then it will be for the town board to decide how they want to organize the hearing and the agenda. Okay. Any other comments? Okay, so we have some more work to do and a little ways to go before we're near the finish line, but I feel like we've done really good work so far. And thank you everybody for all of your time here during these meetings and also behind the scenes with the drafts. Again, if you have any thoughts or comments or questions that weren't addressed tonight, please send an email or put a note directly in the Google document. I'm getting alerts for anytime anybody adds anything, comments or otherwise, so I'll see it, and if somebody else needs to get involved, I can coordinate. Just drop a comment and it will be addressed. Okay. With that, I think I can motion to adjourn the meeting. It's Charlene seconds. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, thanks so much, everybody. We'll follow up over email with